I think that there is.
I don't think that's a deal. Yeah.
I mean, it may be enough things.
Right, no, I get what you're
I'm just
saying.
saying, it's,
Like that we're maintaining and upgrading.
I think that provides flexibility.
Right.
And it's to the downtown district.
These are my questions.
Right. Right. Yeah. I didn't bring a pen.
Hello, ladies.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Only 51.
We can have a countdown, like 10 or 9.
All right. It is 7 o'clock, so I'd like to call the meeting to order. If you could all please rise for the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we will do roll call. Bonnie here. Terry Bowman here. Mercedes Evans here. Michelle Forrest here. Jennifer Hoover here. I'm here. Alyssa Packer. Emily Smith here. Thank you. And with that, we will open it up for the first period of public comment. Just a reminder, when you come up to the microphone, if you could please state your name and your address clearly for the minutes. And you do need to put your get a little bit closer to the microphone, then you might be comfortable for people to hear you well, who are particularly those who are online. So if you have public comment, you can come on up. I see Diana, you are the first one here with the plan public comment. So thank you.
Diane Burlingame, 350 North 24th Street. Thank you for putting me on the agenda. And I know that on the agenda it says I'm representing the Condominium Greenway, but in fact wearing another hat tonight, that of the Condominium Creek Watershed Association. CCWA, short, is a 501c3 which formed 33 years ago to protect the creek and its watershed. We're concerned with the creek and also with this watershed. Concerned with the creek because that's where we get most of our water. And we're also concerned with the well-being of the land, the people living on it, and the flora and fauna which depend on the creek. To that end, this is what we have done so far. We do 4 creek cleanups a year in the summer. We take a mile of creek each time and pull out tons of tires, furniture, machines, crockery, beer cans, and a lot more. Paul Garrett, our Camp Hill neighbor and CCWA member, organizes the cleanups. We plant trees and shrubs along the creek to prevent erosion and filter out toxic substances. We do this in conjunction with the Million Tree Project of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Some of the trees we planted are next to Creek Road, where the Seabird Park Trail and the unnamed pond meet the Conduit River. Under the guidance of Dickinson's Alarm Lab, 20 teams from CCWA deploy monthly along the main stem and tributaries to gather stream samples and compile data. We also do educational outreach. We have a tent at Pumpkin Fest each year where we involve kids in a play watershed table and talk to the adults about the watershed. We offer small grants to high school students who would like to do a project concerning the creek. We've delivered testimony at state government regulatory hearings, we've acted as judges at the Capital Area Science Fair and awarded prizes to students. We have supported the County Planning Commission Conduit Creek Water Trail map, which shows where the put-ins and takeouts are along the creek. Last year, we sponsored a bioblitz at the DeFilippo Nature Preserve. We've done a lot more than that, but because I know you have a lot of work after this, I won't go on. In conclusion, we want to thank you for permitting us to plant trees along Creek Road and also for storing our trailer that we use for cleanups by the public shed near the compost facility. And everyone here is very welcome to join the CCWA and contribute to the well-being of the Conduit women.
Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you to all the members of the CWA for all of their efforts to keep the creek clean and healthy. Thank you. Other public comments?
Can you hear me from here, or you take this?
You can take it off, yeah.
Bruce Bigelow, 20 South 26th Street in the borough, and I'm here on behalf of Trinity Lutheran Church. That is on your agenda today. We will be considering repayment plan for sidewalks to be replaced by the borough and reimbursement of units. You're probably aware the Trinity Lutheran Church has probably the longest stretch of sidewalk in this streetscape proposal. I based it on today, and it's probably not accurate. But if I understand your reasoning correctly, $77 a linear foot replacement cost of the Trinity Lutheran Church would be in excess of $28,000. Substantial amount of money. Well, imagine it takes us a lot of money to time to put that much money in the offering plates. Again, just by eyeballing the condition of the sidewalks that are there, only about a quarter, I think, would not pass muster with the borough's regulations. I understand that for aesthetic purposes, you would like to replace all of those slabs with nice white sidewalks, and that would look nice. But on the other hand, I don't think that property owners, in this case, Trinity Lutheran Church, should be burdened with the cost of replacing the approximately $21,000 sidewalks that don't really need to be replaced. So I'm imploring you in consideration tonight to decide on a policy of reimburse only billing property owners for those sections of the slabs which need to be replaced. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mike Fideo, F-I-N-I-O. I live at 2314 Market Street, for service field, headquarters building. Council's heard from me in writing, and I've first about this before. From my understanding, 85 of the owners affected by the streetscape project, and we require easements from 12 property owners. We're one of those. The manner in which this was handled was an announcement last August that we had to do this. Here's the easement we want, and you're going to pay for your side. There was no offer of any compensation as required by law for the taking of property. Just we'll get an easement agreement from us and we'll sign it. We were offered a couple of ginkgo trees, which we said. And I'm here to reiterate, echoing what Bruce said. Simply the assumption was made that we would agree that sidewalks need to be replaced. One, entirely, from what I understand. No specification, we received no report from an engineer other than it's yellow on plans. It's replaced. And the manner in which it was handled was just inconsiderate. It was presented to a property owner. This is what you're going to do. This is what we need. This is what's going to cost you, and you're going to pay for it. Amy and I have stated our position very clearly. We're not going to sign an easement until all the issues dealt with appropriately. The worst way to deal with that is to litigate. Lawyer, it's what I used to do for a living. It's annoying. It takes time. It costs a lot of money. It would be a waste of the borough's resources to do that. So last September, we met with Sarah and Julie and said, let's find a solution here. And nothing's happened. Council's changed hands. There's new people here. There are bigger issues to consider overall with respect to this project. But the manner in which you deal with individual property owners, especially the residential ones along Market Street, I think merits better communication or open dialogue and dealing with those property owners legally. Just walking in and saying this is what we want. Put yourself in our shoes. You spend a lot of money taking care of that property and making it look nice. I'm very proud of it. I'm proud that we part of downtown Hill. I think we got a lot to the beauty of the street. And to come along and say we're going to cut off part of your corner and fix your sidewalks. So I don't want to stand up here and say the same thing every time you have a meeting, but if I have to, I will. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is David Portier. I actually live in Cumberland. I own several properties in Canfield. And I guess I'm here, because it's on the record, I spoke quite a bit several months ago when I was notified that the borough was going to move forward with the streetscape project, but charge property owners for part of the expense. For those of you that are you're all obviously involved in the community, I understand all that, and that's great. But I think to give this a little bit of context, and historical context, is that 4 or 5 years ago, all the borough people that had properties along Market Street there in that area were invited to several meetings to talk about doing the streetscape. There was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of interest, a lot of support. Never was it said anything about owners paying for anything of being through. Never said. Okay. I actually knew nothing about any of this until another property owner called me and said, "Oh, they're having a meeting tonight, not tonight, a couple of months ago, and they're going to be voting on whether to charge the property owners for sidewalk." I was completely shocked. Came to the meeting, spoke about why I didn't think that was a great idea. And I think really, money's an issue with everybody, of course. Probably for me, frankly, less than some. But there's a lot of people along Market Street. You're just going to end up in a fight with them because they're not going to pay. They probably don't have. Okay. So I think you want to consider that. I think the other thing that's even more disappointing is that I see an opportunity here to really include people from the community, not just people that own property, but include people in the community to do things. My understanding is they're $200,000 short of what they need, roughly, give or take, to be able to do this vision of a nice streetscape. I can't imagine that they're raising money, $200,000 in Campbell Borough to make the town look beautiful would be that big of a challenge. And so I think that that is something that needs to be considered. I think the pushback that's going to occur if this is voted on and everybody said, yes, we're just going to put them in and fill up the light. I think you're really going to open up a can of worms that nobody's going to be able to want to deal with. And it certainly is not good relations with the people in the community. And most of the people in Long Market know other people in Canada. But the last thing I just want to say is that also the property owners were not notified. I can guarantee you there were property owners in Long Market to this day that have no idea that this is going on. And so that's a disservice that we really going to be speaking about. So, thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Sarah, you have one that was submitted electronically.
This was submitted by Tom Miller, 848 Winwood Road. Best of luck and congratulations to our new borough council. The welfare and health of our borough is now in very good hands. I'm optimistic that there will be a higher degree of environmental consciousness and consequence factored into all of your decisions. In that regard, there have been perennial issues impacting the limited natural resources within the borough. It is submitted that 3 basic matters require your considered and direct oversight. Primarily, there is a recurring practice observed over my 25 years in Country Club Hills of over-salting the roads at this time of year. While acknowledging that the use of rock salt or sodium chloride is the cheapest and most common quote-unquote necessary evil to keep the hilly roads and intersections safe for travel, its application, particularly over the past month, has been excessive. The result is toxic runoff directly into Connedaguana Creek and the Susquehanna River, which is killing already endangered wildlife, particularly amphibians and fish. Its overuse is also accelerating the deterioration of road surfaces, e.g. the intersection of 32nd and Market Street, including driveways, and is highly corrosive to vehicles. Suggestion is offered that the borough consider pre-salting with a brine solution or using a closed loop system on the trucks to more accurately control and reduce dispersal per EPA recommendation, and which has been successful in New Hampshire in reducing sodium chloride application by 20%, simply limiting the frequency and duration of application based on increased real-time inspection of the roads by Department of Public Works employees who are otherwise a common sight in the neighborhood could easily reduce the salt load by 30% without diminishing vehicular safety. Indeed, the piles of salt often remaining long after the ice and snow has melted are traffic hazards themselves. The second and third area of concern regarding the continuing use of the glyphosate weed killer by the Department of Public Works or its contractors and the excessive removal of living trees, particularly in Sabre Park, without commensurate replanting will be discussed at greater length in future comment to council and are hopefully already on your radar. In the interim, thank you for your immediate attention to the wasteful and ultimately injurious practice of oversalting our roadways. And that was submitted respectfully by Tom Miller, 848 Winwood Road.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other public comment, the first item on the agenda is our president's announcements, and I will turn that over to Lee to speak to where we are with the pursuing litigation regarding the tolling of I-83 Southbridge.
Thank you. I'll start with a little background. As you all know, we were asked to start the process of initiating litigation with PennDOT while seeking to build some type of conglomerate to share those costs. So I want to give a little bit of background as to where we are at in that process. Pretty shortly after the meeting on the 11th, we were able to get together with representatives of New Cumberland, Ormleysburg, Lemoyne, and Lower Allen. That was the initial group that showed interest in moving forward. The agreement will be considered by each of those over the next month or so. Wormleysburg last night authorized that it be placed on the agenda for its next meeting, and we expect them to go forward. The others will be considering it next week, following week, and then I believe the following week in terms of that first core group. We have also had very positive interactions with the county about their participation in some potentially a matching situation with the funds we're able to bring together. The county was very receptive to participating in some degree. That was earlier this week that we first met with them. They're going to continue that conversation, and we're hopeful that they'll come forward as well. They did very much appreciate that we were able to get a core group together to show that, you know, we're here, we're moving forward, and we're looking to you, county, for additional support in our effort that really impacts the larger group. They're very appreciative of that initiative, so I wanted to pass that along. We were also contacted by CapCog Gary Myers with CapCog Executive Director. I was contacted by Nate Silcox, who I've known for a while. He's an active member of CapCog. He asked me to give Gary a call. I made the mistake of calling Gary on his birthday while he was on vacation in Florida. He called me the next day and told me that he needs me to come to a meeting later this month to present to the entirety of CapCog. I have a conflict that night. My colleague Isaac, who handles most of our litigation anyway, will be at that meeting. He's presented before at CapCog, so he's known there. We've heard informally from a couple of members of CapCog that they're expecting that to be a very popular option. So we're hopeful that that drives further participation, which will serve to lower everyone's costs and better spread it out amongst the impacted communities. I believe that Hampton, I'm not 100% certain on this, but I believe that Hampton will be discussing participating in some type of litigation at its meeting later this month as well. Nate indicated that it was something they were discussing as an agenda item. So hopefully, and with all of that, I think that we have a good chance of generating a much larger group that will really help to spread the costs out more equitably amongst all those that are impacted. In this agreement, we did set forth an initial cost sharing mechanism, and we were careful, however, though, to allow for sort of twisting the knobs differently as others join. If I had a crystal ball and I was 100% accurate, I kind of think that where we end up with is enough participants that we end up just level funding. That way we're not, at some point, it's not worth counting the beans. And, you know, if we have enough and the number's small enough, everyone's the value and just equally participating with support from the county. So we do have a provision within the agreement that allows future participants to join. And the steering committee, that initial group of solicitors in conjunction with the council, will work on determining, you know, how those numbers are adjusted. We do also, within the agreement, have a refund provision in the event that it goes to a certain point and ends, then we refund it based on the contribution levels that are set in the agreement or later revised by addendum. We will be working actively with the other solicitors that are part of the steering committee. As part of that, we've suggested, and it's included, that our invoices for the work will be submitted to the other solicitors to have second, third, fourth, and fifth reviews on the reasonableness of those bills. So there'll be a backstop before those come to Sarah to be pulled out of the escrow bucket. I think that pretty well covers what we have within the agreement. The initial contribution for Camp Hill is included at 30,000, but again, the hope is that we can get others to participate and bring all of those numbers down substantially. We started out with a more complicated formula, and then Lower Allen joined the call, and we realized their population, including 3,000 prisoners, kind of made it difficult to really consider their the impact that it has compared to Camp Hill, Wormleysburg, Lemoyne. So we started fiddling and then just realized these numbers in our view as a group kind of make sense between population, tax revenue, and general impact from the project itself. So that's, after significant discussion, that's how we came up with those numbers.
Thank you. And we're not sure that this would be presented as a resolution, but we do have a resolution ready for consideration, which is 2022-03. If someone would like to make a motion to move that resolution, we can, if there's a second, we can then open the floor for discussion. Does that sound like right, Rich?
I'll make a resolution or a motion. I'd like to make a motion to approve resolution number 2022-3. And do we have a title for this? Let's see, authorizing joint cost sharing agreement with various interested municipalities regarding the challenge to the I-83 South Bridge project.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second. Oh, everybody got it? All right. So the floor is open for discussion.
When do you anticipate it being filed?
The complaint is 98% completed. What we have to add in is the individual communities that are listed parties, their fact set for their particular interests that are impacted by the project. So at this point, we don't think that it's imminent that it's going to move in the next couple of weeks such that we would have to rush into court. So it's kind of going to be guided when the others jump in and execute the agreement and move forward.
When you say imminent, you mean you're referring to the secretary signing the contract? Okay. I thought that was supposed to happen before the end of the month.
So
Is that not the case?
what, as you can imagine, they're not being exactly forthcoming with where things expect to be. However, the RFQ was issued and the 3 respondents were identified. However, the RFP and the proposals have not been publicly posted yet, which leads us to believe that they're kind of pausing for a moment for some indefinite period of time. So I think that, the next couple of weeks is when next 3 weeks probably is when we hope to move forward with filing.
I just had one last question. So this was brought up at the school district meeting recently also, and there was an amendment or clarification to specify that it was the South Bridge tolling project. So do you think that clarification is necessary or not? And I only bring it up because, as we said, we're not opposed. We obviously recognize and acknowledge that improvements to the bridge are necessary. It's just the funding mechanism and the impact that we disagree with.
So we have kept that a little vague because I think that although the funding mechanism is the largest issue because of what that does to local roads, I think that secondarily there will likely be some construction-based concerns that we will want to probably work through, especially Lemoyne because of the impact of the ramp. So I don't want to limit it strictly to tolling because there might be some actual constructability discussions to be had.
So given that it appears it'll be a couple of weeks, is what you're suggesting till we would file this? Does the wait jeopardize the seriousness they're going to take versus if we filed now and then allow people to add on as they provided information? Is there amendments that we can continue filing to a suit?
We could do that. I don't think that the wait for this initial group is very problematic. I think that perhaps once we get Lemoyne, which I believe is next week when they're considering it, and that's really the other one that I think really moves the ball most quickly. So we'll probably need to discuss this, after Lemoyne meets in some capacity and discuss the exact timing.
Okay.
Is there anything we can do from a PR perspective and whatever we do tonight to maybe, do some kind of PR press around what we're intending to do to kind of put a little pressure out there, even though, we haven't formalized it?
So just an additional update, what we've been discussing when we've met with other potential stakeholders is, we envision this and it necessarily has to be sort of a 3-pronged approach with the litigation, legislation and grassroots efforts. One of the potential outcomes of litigation might be that they just have to follow the process, which means going back, announcing the bridges, sending it to the legislature, which means the legislation and impact. But then how do you influence the legislators, grassroots efforts? And that's something that's been supported by everyone we've discussed. We've discussed this with, and they've offered their support from not only potentially joining the group, but working with the legislators. We've met with Greg Rothman a couple of weeks ago. He's helping to talk with some of his constituents about getting them to join the group. So we already are working some of those other avenues to help move that part forward while we're simultaneously working on the litigation.
Yeah, I'd love a headline like West Shore communities band together, type of thing. I just don't know the timing, the best timing of that versus the legal side of it. Does that go ahead of that effort?
I would probably say parallel or a little behind.
Thank you. Okay. The only other thing I'll say is, yay, thank you for your hard work on this. When I opened it up, I was so happy to see the work, so thank you.
Alyssa, one more question. So right now we're intending $100,000, which we shared among the interested stakeholders. So what's the possibility of that, of us, we the collective, having to pay more?
One of the issues with litigation is that the costs are often driven by the other side. We're hopeful that with some of the other participants coming on and the county support, that there won't be another coming back to the well. That's our goal.
Okay, so seeing no other comments or discussion, we will go ahead and vote. All those in favor of resolution 2022-03. Okay, thank you. To authorizing the joint cost sharing agreement with various interested municipalities regarding the challenge to the I-83 South Bridge project, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so that motion carries. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is approval of the consent agenda, which includes the agenda for the meeting, the minutes from council and committee meetings, and the treasurer's report. There a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. Second. Any discussion of the consent agenda? Okay, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, the agenda approval has been affirmed. The next thing on the agenda is the manager's report, so I'll turn that over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. We had some sad news last week as one of our public works employees, Walt Fioriti, passed away. Walt was a very hard worker and an outstanding member of our team, and we've really been struggling with his loss. And our thoughts are with his wife, Britt, and their family. We have selected a code enforcement and zoning officer, Colton Whiteman, has worked as a code officer in Harrisburg, Hazleton, and most recently, sorry, Carlisle Borough, but we got him. And we're looking forward to bringing his skills and energy to our staff. He will start on February 28th. In the meantime, you're stuck with me and our subcontractors who are actually doing a very good job with the code services. And our office manager, Tammy, has done a tremendous job of making sure that all of this stays organized and that we're ready for Colton's arrival. I did attend the PennDOT Market Street Bridge Rehabilitation Project meeting. It was far more complex than I was able to grasp. It seems like Warren Leesburg has really been taking the lead in watching this. But they said that work must be completed on both the western and eastern bridges. They assured the audience that they would not be working on this project at the same time as the I-83 South Bridge project. They hope to not begin construction until at least 2024. But several of the detour plans would involve the Harvey Taylor or I-83 bridges. So they did have one plan that didn't involve any detours at all. A lot of discussion about walkability, pedestrian and bike safety. So they have a variety of options, and I would encourage everyone to follow along. It's available on PennDOT's website. I also attended remotely the municipal advisory board meeting with the county commissioners. They said it was one of the best attended meetings we've had. We talked about the resolution that was passed by the county. They did talk about our opposition to the tolling, and I did speak and encourage the other municipal leaders to join with us in a legal challenge. The county said they were developing a structure for a grant application process to help them distribute the American Rescue Plan funds that they were granted. So they're going to hope to have the initial stages of the grant process set up by the end of February. There's like 10 different types of funding, so we have to sort through it all and see some of it as bridges that we don't have any owned bridges, but there are some grants that potentially could be available for green infrastructure improvements and some other road projects that we might be able to fit into this category. So we will be investigating that. And finally, we did have an audit of our safety procedures and facilities by our workers' compensation insurance. We were great and always getting better on our safe work environment. And we're hoping to, not hoping, we're going to establish a safety committee, which is what's recommended by our audit. It's difficult to keep the staff from begging me to join that safety committee, but we will have to pick and choose who is allowed to join the safety committee. Right? Let's just in charge of the safety committee. So, I mean, I joke, but it's not. It's always critical to make sure that our employees are safe at all times on the job, and you can only continue to do better with that. So that's my report.
Thank you, Sarah. I just want to note that our agenda format has changed slightly. We're trying out a new format. So for those who were not at the last meeting, we have our reports of committees and board liaisons. This will include monthly reports as well as discussion of any items that we may take action on. And then there'll be another period for public comment so that you have an opportunity to share any comments that you might have in light of our discussion before we actually take action on it. So there's that third period of public comment in the middle now. So with that, I will turn it over to Mercedes to hear the public safety report. Great, let's start with the mayor's report, please.
Okay. The police reports are in their packet. The numbers for January, the officers handled 462 calls, and we will keep each month. The numbers will be added to this report. So at the end of the year, you'll have all 12 months. There is training set up. The Central PA Chiefs Association is sponsored some training. It's going to be held here in Costa Falls for our department, and other departments are going to be here as well. The first training is on March 1st and 2nd. It's minimizing bias and perception of bias. On March 17th and 18th, de-escalation and non-escalation training. On April 21st, 22nd, advanced leadership. And on October 19th and 20th, strategic planning. I want to thank the chief for heading this up and getting this all set up. The training is being presented by Randy Means, and he's a nationally recognized police expert, and he's done training here before last year, I believe. So, fire department, real quick, we ran 20 calls in January. We spent 30 hours on those calls. And the last 2 weeks, we have been touring the school buildings. That's been our training each Monday night. Purpose of that is just so the guys are, especially newer guys, they get familiarized with the layouts of the school, so that if we ever have to go there, they can find their way around. Any questions? That's my report. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I saw
not specific to your report, but just in your theme, somebody did reach out to me to say that there's funds available for like grant funds for fire and EMS.
Yeah, we're always
Yeah,
applying for grants.
okay. So if they have something, they can reach out to you.
They can.
Okay.
Great, thank you so much. At the January 12th meeting, Councilwoman Hoover asked the police incident reports could include current month to month and year-to-date comparisons by incident. I'm happy to share that beginning next month. The report to the council will include the data requested. The chief already talked about the training. Councilwoman Bowman and I will be attending a virtual symposium this Saturday, the 12th, hosted by the Cumberland County Department of Public Safety. It's an opportunity for newly elected officials to learn more about their duties and responsibilities as they relate to emergency management. And today, the Public Safety Committee has one action item on the agenda later on regarding the Earl Fish Project Trick or Treat 5K race scheduled for November 5th. And in advance of the resolution, just as an FYI, I wanted to share that there are no street closures associated with this race. We would just be pretty much sanctioning the use of public roads for a private event. And they'd be using the same route that they've used the last couple of years. And lastly, as a reminder that the Public Safety Committee meets the fourth Thursday of each month at 4:30. That concludes my report. Thank you. Next up is Public Works, Jennifer Hoover.
Thank you. The Public Works Committee held its first meeting on Tuesday, February 1st. At that meeting, we received an update from our engineer on a variety of projects, which are outlined in the monthly report. We are still working our way through the Eisenhower Walkway project and are requesting additional funding for that and making a presentation, I think, next Friday. This Friday. So we are hopeful to gain some more financial support for that project, which involves improvements, not just at Eisenhower Walkway, but at Preston Road and Logan Street and Walnut, correct? So that is in process. We also discussed the 21st storm sewer replacement, and there will be a detour using PennDOT only roads in June after school. So we thought that was more advantageous than doing a detour now during the school year, and there were some other advantages, and Mike can speak to that if he wants. We also discussed paving. There will be communication sent out to residents regarding timing, with noted in the Public Works Committee notes, noted that residents could complete curb grant work in late May, sidewalks in mid-July. Both would need to be completed by September 1st in time for paving. Regarding action items, we will be considering what surface should be on the Siebert Park Trail. And that is about 0.5 miles of the trail, including the construction of a kayak launch at Creek Road on Gwinnett Creek. That trail surface would provide better sloping as well as ADA access. So before I turn it over to the engineer for his report, we do have, and he can discuss the 4 options before us. And additional information is provided in the report, as well as advantages, disadvantages, both in terms of cost and maintenance. So, Mike.
Thank you. There are 4 different trail surface options that are outlined in my report. 2 of them were discussed by previous councils when we were preparing a DCNR grant application. A final decision wasn't made at that time, other than to file the grant application for a paved surface, since that would be the safer bet and perhaps could be rolled back to a gravel surface. That decision was reached at a later time. So we're cutting out at that later time and looking to reach a decision so that we can file some permit applications. You may recall that the Stormwater Authority has a stream restoration project in the stream that's parallel to that trail, and we need to get a DEP for that DEP permit for that stream restoration. So whatever we're going to do with the trail needs to be reflected in that permit. So a brief summary of the 4 different options. They're in my report. I can get into more detail, but the 4 different ones that we discussed at Public Works Committee are first the standard asphalt paved surface, which is, I'm sure very familiar to everybody. It's a standard bituminous asphalt. That would be cost neutral because that's what the grant funds. Advantages are that it's resistant to erosion, it's easy to keep it ADA accessible, it's durable. The second one that we talked about previously, and is still an option now, is compacted stone. There are ways to select stone mixes that are ADA accessible. They are not as durable as an asphalt surface. They are subject to erosion. Some of the things that make it compact easily and make it ADA accessible are the fine grains of the material. That also makes it erodible. So pros and cons there. It would save money compared to the asphalt surface, but we would have to go back to DCNR because that's different than what was awarded in the grant. Third one we discussed is a pervious asphalt surface, which looks from 10 feet away very much like a standard asphalt surface. But if you look closely, you can see that some of the sand fraction of the asphalt mix is absent, which allows sort of an open porous matrix so that water can sink in through the asphalt surface and into a stone bed underneath. Any pavement surface is usually underlain by stone. It would be an especially thick layer of stone, and it would be clean stone, not with fines in it, for a pervious pavement surface to allow storage and infiltration of stormwater. That has a cost increase for the materials, but one of the major factors is the maintenance. For a porous pavement surface, it needs to be vacuumed periodically. I think the DEP guidance is twice per year. Some folks do it more often depending on the kind of traffic that they have there. And there's a specialized piece of equipment needed to do that. Lester looked at some manufacturers for what the purchase price would be for that equipment. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000 to $250,000, which is, you know, as my grandfather would have said, a $20 saddle on a $10 horse if we would use it just for this trail. But there may be options if you have intentions of doing pervious pavement in other areas to use that equipment. There may also be options to contract it out. We actually spoke with the folks in the library just here this evening. They have a pervious pavement parking lot. They have a contractor who does it for, I think it was about $125 per time. So something in the neighborhood of $300, $350 a year if you have somebody come in 2-3 times a year to do it. The last one we talked about was a little bit more of a pilot project. It's a new product that's starting to be used on the market, mainly in playground applications, where we can use a wood mulch with a polymer binder that goes down with a piece of paving equipment, you know, just like asphalt would. It's porous, so it allows water through. It saves on stormwater management costs. It's less durable than either the pervious or the impervious asphalt, probably more durable than stone, but would come with a cost increase.
Mike, when is the DEP permit due? Application.
The application doesn't have a hard deadline, but we need to have the stream restoration project done by the middle of 2023. So we want to get that permit application filed this spring in order to have time to get the permit issued, get the job designed, bid, and built.
And can you just remind all of us and those in the audience where the trail project begins and where it ends in relation to what's already there?
Sure. I think everyone's familiar with the pump station building that's in the park at the bottom of the pool parking lot. That would be basically where the new trail begins. There would be a couple of new ADA parking spaces there. It would loop around behind the pump station building and the new pump station building that's being designed to go next door. It would go down the western edge of the park and basically follow the existing trail alignment along most of its length. There's one area where we have to move it a little bit to take a longer route down a hill to keep the slope ADA accessible. And as we get near the bottom, we have to shift it a little bit to avoid a property line, make sure that it stays on the park property. The alignment's pretty similar to what's there now with a couple of tweaks.
Is it fair to say if we were to pursue the pervious pavement option, assuming that we would contract out the vacuum equipment work, that we would only have a net cost increase of $55,000?
Yeah, as far as the initial construction costs. So in the second page of my report, there's kind of a breakdown of those costs. We estimate the initial construction to be about $70,000 more, but you save about 15 by not having to do a separate stormwater facility. This pervious pavement can mitigate its stormwater in place. So the net there without the equipment is about 55. As far as the upfront cost, there would be a little bit of an ongoing maintenance cost.
Could you just go over one more time, which of the four options would be the least maintenance and longer lasting?
The least maintenance and longest lasting would be a standard impervious, bread and butter asphalt pavement.
A couple questions. One is, there is a path at Seabird Park that we just put in. Do you know what the surface was?
So you're talking about the Goddard Trail, it's on the eastern edge of the park.
Yeah, I think so. Whatever's going up around like the cabin.
There was one that was on the eastern side of the stadium. It was 2 years ago. That was asphalt. Then when it gets back to the cabin, I think that's a mulch trail. That one didn't have to be ADA accessible. One of the provisions of the DCNR grant that we have is that it has to be ADA accessible.
Oh, okay, I see. And the cross country, do they use that part of the trail? What's the impact on
I
it?
don't know.
They have a route through the park. I never had to get in cross country, but I know that there's some route. I could never figure out what it was.
They use part of it.
Yeah.
But they don't go the whole way down to the creek, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah. We're still discussing a little bit. I guess I'll just say that, like, living near there, I like the way it seems very woodsy and natural. And I guess part of me feels like putting asphalt down through there takes away from the scenic beauty of that area for walkers that want to go down and just relax in nature.
I have a question. So with regard to the compacted stone, this is like crushed stone.
Yes.
What, I mean, up until this point, how has that path been maintained? Has it been maintained with crushed stone currently?
I'll defer that to Lester, but I think that's a yes.
Okay. And how often, what's the cost and how often have we had to replenish the stone? Once a year or twice a year?
It kind of depends on the storms.
Okay.
Usually if there's a really heavy rainstorm or a creek, usually when the creek's coming up, we've had enough rain to kind of displace stones. In the past, from what I've been told, it's been once a year at least. It takes several tryouts to load the stone and 4 guys around 2 days with equipment that we don't have anymore. They used to have a tractor with what's called York brake on it. So they've been trying to do it with a skid steer or by hand. So 1 to 2 times a year, weather dependent though. So if we get a big rainstorm, your 88 compliant path no longer 88 compliance. So that's another side of it from my perspective, there's a little bit of liability there that we aren't exactly set up to have just maintenance team run down there and take care of that.
And sorry, I have one more question. So if we did, there's several of these that if we did, let's say the compacted stone and the wood chip polymer, it says that a separate stormwater BMP would be required. So is there anything that we could do for either of those options in terms of the swales or some sort of wood curbing on either side of where, the crushed stone or the wood polymer would go? Is there anything we can do to keep it from, rushing and going everywhere?
Sure. I guess point of clarification first, the wood polymer binder option would not require separate stormwater facilities. That's a pervious product, so it can mitigate in place.
Okay.
So that one and the pervious pavement would both mitigate in their own footprint.
Okay.
The impervious pavement and the crushed stone would require a separate stormwater facility. There are a couple places where the trail is washing out, and we would want to put in those locations a drainage pipe to get the water across. And we would do that in any case. That in and of itself wouldn't mitigate for rate and volume increases from the increased impervious area. So that would have to be kind of a separate feature from just the drainage. We looked at 2 different ways to do that in the DCNR grant application. The one that we selected was to do sort of a coarse stone berm along the side of the trail, which gives a little bit of room if somebody rides the bike off of the trail that they could recover. And then that coarser stone could allow the runoff from the trail to get down into an infiltration trench. Another option, but the one that wasn't selected at that time, was to do a stormwater basin up at the top, up near the pump station. But because of the use of that area and the look of it, and the fact that a couple of trees would have to come down to do it, that wasn't a real popular option.
Related to Bonnie's question, like with the crushed stone, does that binder wood chip have to be replaced annually or more often? Or
Yeah, not annually, but it doesn't last as long as a pavement product. The wood, the binder, that's a polymer product, is applied to the wood chips, does a reasonably good job of sealing it to keep that wood substrate from rotting as fast, but it doesn't last forever. And it doesn't last for the 20 or 25 years that a pavement product would last. There's not a lot of good case data out there on how long the wood products last. A lot of it depends on the soil's chemistry, how wet it is, these sorts of things. So that's one's a little bit more difficult to predict, but in the overall spectrum, I would put those somewhere between, the annual type maintenance you'd have with a stone product and the 20 to 25 year replacement cycle you'd have with an asphalt product.
When you say 20, 25 years of asphalt, does that include the pervious asphalt that also lasts?
Yeah, if it's properly maintained, pervious asphalt will last about as long as impervious asphalt. The key is the proper maintenance to keep it free draining. If it's not kept free draining, then water will stay in the pores, and the freeze thaw cycle will break it apart.
So, I'm still turned on. So, the wood chip polymer is an extra $35,000 cost. And given that Lester said, depending upon storms and such that we would have with the crushed stone, I'm curious, what's the cost offset in maintenance yearly, if you know what that is, compared to, okay, we're paying an extra $35,000 for the wood chip over the course of maybe 20 years before we would have to replace that, or 15 years?
If I had to estimate, it's hard to do because there's not a lot of good data out there in the industry on the wood chip product. I think that's probably a 5 to 10 year service.
Okay.
More so than a 20 year.
Okay.
We could probably work out based on materials cost and labor costs, what the cost is for the public works crew to go out there and do the stone replacement. I don't have that number tonight, but that's something that we could work out.
I would just like to note, one of my concerns about the stone dust is that it's only ADA accessible if it's maintained, right? Whereas the other, and it does require a lot of maintenance. And while it saves money, we are interested in preserving the environment and the water quality there. And this one has the most runoff. So with that stone dust, it's very different than the gravel that's out there now. It's very fine dust. Again, I have a hard time imagining how that remains ADA accessible without tons of work by our public works crew. So
The runoff is a great point. The Stormwater Authority is doing the stream restoration project to stabilize that corridor and to keep sediment out of the Chesapeake Bay. That's the goal that they're trying to achieve. That's what their progress is measured in, is pounds of sediment reduction. The stone dust being, intrinsically fine grained and susceptible to not just water erosion, but wind erosion, might run counter to what we're trying to do with the stream restoration project.
So what I'm hearing is that both the impervious and pervious asphalt have a similar life.
Yeah, the similar service life as long as they're maintained.
Neither of those options risk our grant.
No, either one should be fine by DCNR. If we did the pervious option, we would probably want to drop them a note, but I don't anticipate they have any issue with that because as far as the walkability, bikeability, ADA accessibility is really the same as traditional asphalt.
And I guess to Sarah or Jared, if we were to pursue the pervious asphalt option and we were able to rent the vacuum equipment instead of purchase it, and if it were a $55,000 net increase, how would we budget cover that expense?
I don't know. I mean, we currently, it's a break-even project because the match is coming from the Stormwater Authority's project. So this is the project of just widening and making this trail accessible is kind of icing on the cake of the Stormwater Authority's project. So if we would have to put a match in that's beyond, or we would have to spend money that's beyond the match, that's on us. So we would have to come up with an additional 55,000. The project wouldn't be done until 2023. So I'm sure in the meantime, we'll come up with lots of money. But until then, I would just caution that we do not have that budgeted right now.
My question is then, is the maintenance of the other, are they budgeted? For, like, if we know that we're gonna need whatever to, like the wood chip or any maintenance on that, we would have to add that into the budget as well, that's not in there, correct?
And that's difficult to quantify because it's usually done with our own staff.
Right.
The vacuuming of pervious pavement, I don't know that we do that much at all. If Lester says we don't do that at all right now. So how many, if we can rent equipment, if we can borrow equipment, if we want to steal it, that's an option. But I would say we would have to do some projections to see what the cost of that would be. I can't imagine it would take that much more time than cleaning out the entire creek of the crushed stone the way we have to right now. But I don't know for sure. And we don't have the equipment to do it. So we would have to acquire the equipment, either by purchase or by rental or contract.
I have a question. What prompted us to do this?
Do you want to answer?
Sure. We signed the DCNR grant program and we knew that the trail would fit into a lot of other categories and that we were already doing the stream restoration project there, which gave us more than enough match funds to kind of get a double benefit out of the dollar spent from the stormwater side. Also, in the process of building the stream restoration project, the contractor is going to have to get equipment in and out of there. They're going to have to get access. And really, the only reasonable place for them to do it is the existing trail. So we knew they were going to make a mess of it anyway. And under the stream restoration job, if that was a standalone, the contractor would have to clean up after themselves. They would have to restore the trail to what was there originally. We thought maybe since we're going to get equipment in there to do the work, and we already have that matched money that we can leverage, and it was such a nice fit with the DCNR grant that we went for it. Ultimately, DCNR agreed. They did think it was a good fit for the program and awarded the funds.
Okay, that helps to understand. So, I mean, the idea is that we're going to do a lot of work down there. It's going to mess up the, I'll interpret it in my own words. It's going to mess it up down there. It's really pretty right now. Like, it's very simple and nice woods. So you're like, well, be nice to get some money to fix it. And like, in my view, I'd like to bring it back to like a nice little trail and not have it look like not natural.
The section of the trail is actually part of the Town of Gwinnett Greenway project, which I put Diana down as advocating for that project. She's the Watershed Association is involved with it. It's a regional project to identify a cross municipal boundary trail. And this would be the only section that is in Canfield Borough that would be a formal trail. In its condition as it is now, it's not only is it not ADA accessible, I've gotten concerns from bicyclists. I've heard them speaking at these various Greenway planning meetings who have trouble traversing this surface that's there now. So that's the benefit, and the widening of it is just that I think you can keep something natural while not having it be so natural that it's hiking. So this is designed to take a trail that is really flat enough to walk or ride, but currently the surface is a little bit too rough for someone to go across it in a wheelchair.
the DCNR grant also covered a 50% match for a kayak launch at the gravel pull-off along Creek Road. 2 years ago, we were awarded a Fish and Boat Commission grant for that launch, but that only covered half the cost. We got the other half of the cost in the DCNR grant.
And there is handicap accessibility at that launch as well for kayak launching, which I think is wonderful.
There are ADA accessible parking spaces there, and the ramp itself is accessible. It's not an accessible dock. There are products on the market that can be used for ADA access in kayaks on still water. There's really nothing in the market for moving water. So we're doing the best we can in that regard, but it's not 100% of the way there. There just aren't the right products in the market for it.
But I just wanted to say, if there are no more questions about that, just a reminder that the Public Works Committee meets again on March 1st at 8 a.m.
Thank you, Jennifer. Emily, community business and government.
First on my list is the downtown coordinators report. Items of note, the spring fling is Saturday, March 26th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. It will feature shopping, dining, music by Fire in the Glen, Irish step dancers, kids activities, yard games, and more. Also of note, there was a ribbon cutting at Branches of Life Wellness, which is a new business downtown on Market Street. It's 2138 Market Street. Other new businesses is Sew Shop at 2207 Market Street, and Birch and Iris is now open. That's 2205 Market Street. So that was the downtown coordinators report. Our community business and government relations meeting that we had last month. The majority of the time we spent discussing the memorandum of understanding with the Downtown Camp Hill Association. As noted in the minutes, we made a couple of changes to it. In section 1, the committee decided that it would make sense to appoint a council member as a non-voting liaison to the DCHA board. That was added as a bullet point. In section 2, there was a bullet point at the end that previously said Campbell Borough expects DCHA to achieve financial independence. It was edited to say DCHA will continue to make efforts to offset some of the borough costs and to contribute funds towards the organization with year-to-year financial growth. Campbell Borough expects DCHA to expand to be inclusive of more businesses during events, either through participation or sponsorships. Another thing that we changed on the MOU in the financial contributions section, there was a conversation about the size of the ad that the DCHA wanted in the borough newsletter. We had it listed as a quarter-page ad. They requested a half-page ad. So as a committee, we decided that we would say yes to the half-page ad, but requested that the Campbell Borough logo be included as a sponsor for all downtown events that will be advertised in the newsletter. In the financial contribution for the farmers market, we changed some of the verbiage regarding the cash contribution for the farmers market to include the contingency on approval of the market rules and regulations. Lastly, on the financial contribution breakdown, we decided to separate the actual borough costs from the in-kind contributions so we could figure out how much we're actually spending in cash money versus what we're donating. So we will have a couple action items for consideration when we get to the action item section. We will consider appointing me as council liaison to the Downtown Camp Hill Association. And then we'll consider approval of the memorandum of understanding with the Downtown Camp Hill Association. Do you have any questions on that before I move on to anything else?
We discuss feedback for this.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know when is the appropriate time. You tell me.
Okay. All right, terrific. So yeah, it's a great opportunity for our community. And we're basically saying that we're going to donate $37,800 towards this group, and then also in-kind activities and things. So
Right.
I think it's really important to understand, like, what are the citizens of Camp Hill getting out of investing in this group?
Yes. Is that a question?
Yeah, I guess.
Yes. So in the MOU, in section 2, it says all of the things that the Downtown Camp Hill Association is expected to provide. But the general idea is that Downtown Camp Hill Association works as a group, that it's an all volunteer group that works to revitalize our downtown and, you know, put on events and get the community and the businesses more engaged with each other to have a vital downtown.
I do want to note that a big chunk of that money that you're referencing, Sherry, is slated to support a manager of a farmer's market. So that would also be, that's also something that we've heard from community members that they really miss, was the loss of the farmer's market out in the borough parking lot here. So that is a big chunk of that money.
And the other part is Julie. That, I mean, she's the majority of, is that she's got half of her time is with the working with the Downtown Camp Hill Association.
And so they'll have representation at council meetings. They'll be here.
If they want to be here, they can be here. I think they come depending upon what we're talking about.
Okay.
But we will have representation at their board meetings.
Okay, terrific. And it talks about like quarterly reports provided to the borough. Like, what are the metrics around this group? Because I think that's really important to define exactly like what are we driving towards with this group? Is it to increase the number of businesses downtown? Is it to increase the revenue of the businesses that are downtown? Is it to get more community members to shop at those businesses in a measurable way? Like, how do we measure this?
I mean, I think that's a great question. And that's part of what this memorandum of understanding is about, is being able to, you know, delineate what we are providing and what they're providing. And then having a liaison on their board allows us to have a more transparent access to what they're trying to do and how everyone can be more involved in the process of making a really vibrant downtown, because that's the general goal.
Right. And I think part of me is like, I want to know what the metrics are up front, because I think it's really important to understand what we're driving towards, because I think a lot of the language in here is aspirational, which is great. But is there like one or two things that we're saying, this is the goal and objective, and by the end of year 1, we expect to be here, the end of year 3, year 5 here. I think that's really important to do up front. But that's something we could probably bring up at the committee level.
Yeah, we can definitely bring that up at the committee level. There is a meeting tomorrow. If anyone would like to come, we have a committee meeting tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Sherry, you're welcome to come. I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts. I can send you the agenda.
Just with respect to the memorandum of understanding, this is memorializing what has already been done in practice for the past couple of years. So while I think it's absolutely reasonable to, you know, have reports on a regular basis where we are asking for particular metrics, this memorandum of understanding is not expanding, you know, what is being done beyond what has been done for a couple of years. It's just articulating that so that there's a clear written documentation of it.
Yeah, I think that's great. So the fact that it's been in place for 2 years, like, we should know what we got out of it right now for like what happened over the past 2 years is different for the downtown. I do have a comment on the attachment C. It says downtown coordinator job description. I think that's like the communication coordinator.
It's Julie.
Right, but her title is not downtown coordinator, right? Because she's only using like half of her time with downtown.
She is half downtown coordinator and half communications for the borough. Correct.
Right, so the job is,
She has the title with a slash. Yeah. And
okay, it was a little unclear. I just was like,
this is her job description.
for her whole job.
Half of the slash of her job.
Okay, so I guess I was like, is it the downtown communication coordinator job description? See what else I have questions about.
The only other question I have is the downtown, are the downtown businesses okay with this memorandum of understanding?
Yeah, so we gave them a draft version of this after we made those changes. And we didn't really have any pushback except about the logo on the ad, which we're going to work out. Julie has assured me that she will find a way to fit it on there without it being too busy. And I said, I can help if necessary. So yes, I think they are in agreement that this is, we went through the points that they had issue with before and found a way to, finesse it a little bit.
I have one question. On attachment D, it says here, the term of this first MOU is effective to July 2022. Is it 2023?
No, I don't know. It's only, so the plan is to review it every year in July. And then, we can make changes as necessary. So it's not a forever document. It is just an initial, let's get an understanding of where we're at with it.
That's helpful. Then I noticed, I know going back and forth here, attachment C in the middle of the page. Chief liaison between the borough and the business community, principally the Downtown Camp Hill Association, on initiatives of mutual interest, notably the streetscape project for Market Street. And I just was kind of wondering, how can they help us there? Sarah, do you want to address that? How Julie's been helping with the streetscape?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean? How DCHA is helping with the market?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. It's like a cord. It raised I was like, well, how are they helping us? Because I think we could use some help.
This is about Julie. This is Julie discussing, this is Julie being a liaison between DCHA and the borough about the streetscape.
My turn?
Yeah.
I just, I appreciate Sherry's comments. I had a similar thought, not specifically like metrics, but, when I read year-to-year financial growth, I too asked myself, what does that really mean? So I would like to have a clearer sense of goals and priorities around that and what that might look like. But I do appreciate that we would have quarterly reports. But so that can be discussed further in committee and more clarity, I would appreciate that. I did have one question regarding the MOU, and it's the 15th bullet regarding the Market Streetscape project. I had wondered why that was listed in there specifically, but not yet valued in the table. And I just do want to comment, I feel like we probably do a lot more, not we, but staff do a lot more that even, would make this number even greater. But to Sherry's point, I think it's also fair to say what is the return on the investment that we're making in DCHA in our town and using the taxpayer dollars to do that. But regarding the specific mention of Market Streetscape project, rather than making such a specific reference, I wondered if it would be more appropriate to replace that reference with something more along the lines of the borough providing improvements to the downtown district streetscape design. My thought being that I might provide a little bit more flexibility between both parties, and it doesn't necessarily tie us into a particular project that right now is evolving. So when we consider that, I may make that suggestion. Amendment at the time.
I mean, I'm not against that. And I don't think the DCHA would have a problem with changing the verbiage on that. I don't think that'll be like, oh my God, you're not going to do any kind of streetscape project downtown. So I think that would probably be fine to amend that in my view of the whole thing.
And I think also if it were changed to that language, it would mean something that we continue to be aware of and working towards improvement of. It just doesn't necessarily end with this one particular project.
Right.
And the July date on that is just, we've been working on this since June, May, June, and actually the downtown coordinator position, as I understand it, has been in existence for what, 5 years maybe?
Mhm.
Before we were. what that person does, what the value of that person's time is, and how the downtown group and the borough benefit from that individual working for both organizations. So I made the mistake of bringing it up, that it was worth memorializing it. We've been discussing it for the past 8 months. So
Which would be nice to vote on it tonight.
it would be nice to vote on it tonight, and if you want to extend that July date, I'd rather not have it January to December, because things kind of get lost to me if you have everything on the same cycle. So, but if you want to stick with July, I would hope that in the back of your mind, you feel good enough about this agreement
Let it work.
that we're not gonna rip it apart again in April.
Right,
It's only 2 months left.
right.
So if you want to keep the July date, just so then we would renew it for a year, that would be fine, but just put that in the back of your mind, if you would.
It seems like we should tie it to the budget, because I feel like we're gonna need to reevaluate. Not, we might love it and want to keep doing it, but we're gonna need to reevaluate the feasibility of it every time we do the annual budget.
So the objective would be for it to become an annual memorandum of understanding, but for this particular time, it's going to only be for fewer than 12 months. But we would be revisiting it every summer prior to the budget. I like timing. And the other thing I wanted to say is this is not a contract. This is just, an MOU is nice and fluffy because it's fluffy. He hasn't even looked at this because I'm not paying him to look at an agreement that is basically memorializing something we're already doing, the cooperative arrangement, and we're all acknowledging this is what we're doing. It's working well. Here's some things that could work better, and let's keep going.
Is that all the comments about the MOU? Okay, on to my next topic. We had a streetscape special meeting for those of you who missed it last week. So in the committee meeting, we had on our agenda to discuss the current status of the streetscape, but there was a realization after continued conversations during our committee meeting about the MOU that we didn't have enough time to go over the entirety of the streetscape, and we have so many new council members that it would make sense to have a special council meeting to go over all the details. Special council meeting was held last week on February 3rd to go over all the details of the streetscape project and where everything stands currently. The main points of the meeting were: 1, the financials. We went through how much money we have for the project, 1.8 million, of which 700,000 is a grant. The current budget costs look to be significantly higher at 2.2 million. We have received the extension of our grant funds until June 23. Currently, we're waiting to find out about a secondary grant that is up to $1.2 million. No construction can start until after we find out about that grant. If we wait for the grant, it is likely we won't be able to finish construction prior to the end of our initial grant funds expiration in June of 23. The discussion was whether we could find out if that could be extended for an additional year before we make any decisions on what to do next, and whether to wait for the secondary grant. The second thing that we talked about, which is obviously of much import to our community members, was sidewalks and curbs. The plans were reviewed with special note about how many sidewalks would need to be replaced, the cost of sidewalks and curbs, and how the current policy decision from prior council was that the property owners would be responsible for the cost of the sidewalks, while the borough would use grant funds to pay for the curbs. Sidewalk and curb replacement, as part of the conversation, we discussed that the prior council had discussed repayment plans for property owners for their sidewalk replacement, as the borough would do all of the sidewalks and curbs at one time and get a better price by combining all of the work. The discussion was how long should the repayment period be, and how will the borough set up a system to track all of those payments. Lastly, easements and ADA ramps. One of the primary upgrades that is part of the streetscape project is creating new ADA ramps on corners, which in some cases require an easement from a property owner to the borough in order to meet ADA guidelines for the ramps. There will be 2 action items for consideration. The first one is consider confirmation of prior council action to pay for curb replacement in the streetscape project area using grant funds. And then the second item for consideration would be consider repayment plan for sidewalks to be replaced by the borough and reimbursed by property owners, and how long that repayment plan would be. I welcome your discussion.
All right, I'm gonna kick us off here. So I'm in market research and I like behavioral economics. I think we have an anchoring problem, which means that, and you know, being someone who sat in the audience for many years, listening to this whole streetscape thing, and some folks here even alluded to it tonight, is there was a lot of anchoring done at the beginning of this project, and I'm not really sure why that anchoring was done. Like, part of me was like, wouldn't the people who are helping us design the streetscape kind of give us like potholes to watch out for and just some guidance about how to roll this out with your property owners? I can't go back and like recreate that or fix it, right?
Right.
I think if we would have anchored out of the get-go, like, this is a downtown project, we want to beautify it because we want to have a walkable, livable community with great businesses, identifiable downtown, so folks actually knew where the heck downtown Campbell is, because go and talk to anyone outside of Campbell, they're like, I have no idea what you need. I think those are all really great. But if out of the gate, we would have said up front that, you know, it's going to take all the property owners to be involved in this project, and that, you know, like any property owner, you would be responsible for potentially part of paying for this project, which is like fixing your sidewalks and getting them, you know, nicely done, and curbs, like they're all part of the project. We don't know right now exactly how that's going to play out, but just like any time the borough goes and paves a street, there's going to be considerations, right?
Right.
So we're in a situation now where we've anchored a bunch of folks to the fact that, guess what? The citizens of Camp Hill and a grant are going to fix up your sidewalks and make a beautiful area for your property. And now we're in a situation where we're saying, you know what? That doesn't really seem like it's kind of a fair deal, because, you know, Sally Smith had to fix her sidewalk. She's not in that district, right? And she had to pay for the sidewalk and the curb, right? So I think we have to be very balanced in what we decide to do here. You know, part of me is like, gosh, we spent $300,000 to design this downtown, and now we're stripping things away. So we're already giving up a bunch of really nice aspects of the downtown plan to get it to like a bare bones. And even then, we can't pay for the whole thing. So I don't know, I'm just open to discussion around these issues and kind of where I'm thinking.
I just want to, I agree. But I did just want to know part of this issue was not necessarily a fault of our own, but of perhaps the engineer who did not include the cover in the cost of the project. So.
Also, obviously, we're coming in this very late in the game. I mean, we're in our second, 5 of us are in our second month on Borough Council. So please bear with us as we work through our communication breakdown and we try to figure out what the best path forward is on this. We're new, we're trying.
Question for council. So to the resident suggestion about raising private funds, is that even a possibility for the borough to do? I don't know who to ask it to. I'm just wondering what's the feasibility, legality of doing that.
Yeah, a good example, good and bad, we'll say, was the Terry Township Community Center. There was a big drive to get community to support it through a fund drive. So that is an option.
What would be, I guess I want to ask with regards to curves, is there a possibility to take curves out of the equation at this moment in time and reconsider at a later date?
Don't we have to?
Not tonight.
We have to do it with paving. though.
Well, Market Street is not being paid. So I just, the pros and cons of doing that.
They would have to redesign the project.
Which would cost us money.
It would cost us a lot of money because the curbs are structured in such a way that they will work to retain or direct the stormwater. So if we leave the curbs where they are, the design that they have calculated that's based on the curb being here and the water coming in here and going this way when it hits the curb will go over top of the lower curve and go wherever it wants to. So in the interest of maintaining the stormwater aspects of the design, I don't think that you can remove the curbs from the project.
Just a comment, I mean, the curbs, if you pay close attention to the curbs while you're walking downtown, down Market Street, the curbs are in incredibly poor shape, and that does contribute to the overall kind of declining look of the street itself.
Have we received, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mercy.
Sarah, or anyone that's been here a little longer, do any of you know when was the last time that any property owners on Market Street were required to make any repairs?
From what I've been told, that's never happened. At least, I don't know, people throw around 30 years since it was last even discussed. No one has been able to tell me how recently those sidewalks were. I mean, if people have done sidewalk work, it's been at their own volition. When the borough has required them to do it, I can't say. I can say we get a lot of complaints about sidewalks and curbs on Market Street. And we continue to ask the complainants to hold off and, try to stick with it before we go out there with our, violation notices, and we're working toward making improvements there from a comprehensive perspective, not going about it from this property is particularly bad, this one's pretty bad, this one's sort of bad. We're trying to address it in a cohesive way for safety, not just for aesthetic.
Sarah, to that point, can you just explain again how certain sidewalks in certain sections, if all the blocks are good, we are not replacing them? And then there's other sections where they're mostly bad and there might be some good blocks within it that are getting replaced as a whole row is getting done, but we're not replacing every block of the entirety of Market Street.
If you look at our sidewalk ordinance, and one of the things we've been working on for, I don't know, 6 months, maybe not that long, is a frequently asked questions letter that we've been preparing to send out, but we have to have some consensus around what the answers to the questions are, because what good is a frequently asked questions sheet if the answers are wrong. So the change to, now I've lost my train of thought. This,
Sidewalk blocks
the sidewalk block
in sections.
they would, the purpose of our bidding them would be to do a slot all in one for
And get a better price.
and get a better price for the project. The majority of the blocks out there, if they're within the engineers identifying of the sidewalks that are deficient, they are deficient under our ordinance. And I think there have been several people who've been involved in the ground and have said, are you kidding me? We can't possibly have that many sidewalks and curbs that don't meet our sidewalk ordinance. And they walked out there and have been very surprised to discover that indeed the sidewalk blocks do not meet our ordinance. But on the potential chance, as the gentleman said, for the church specifically, because it is such a long stretch, I think council could entertain the idea of giving some credit or some measurable benefit to a property owner whose block is going to be replaced because of the cost savings of making it all cohesive.
Right.
But the block would not have had to be replaced if they were on a regular street where you pick and choose, like the streets that we're going to be paving. Jennifer was talking about, we're sending letters to those property owners our crew will be going out and marking which blocks will need to be replaced. And only those will need to be replaced on those others.
Right.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
All right, I have a wild card idea. Why don't we get every property along Market Street to fix their sidewalks and curbs?
I mean, I think the point is that some of the sidewalks are totally fine. In a long enough road that there's no point in.
Right, so I'm just saying, maybe we should do an effort across the entire corridor to fix all the walkability issues along Market Street.
But-
Because then it kind of changes the equation a little bit here for those people who are in the downtown district that are gonna get free curbs.
But the benefit of this particular project, as I understand, one of the benefits is that the borough is coordinating the HOP process aspect of it. Whereas if it were to be done individually,
Right?
each property owner would have to go through that
Yeah,
process.
that's what I'm thinking, that we would just add the rest of the properties to that HOP effort. And we would get
The whole way to where?
the whole length of, I don't know, where there's sidewalks along Market Street that are in Camp Hill Borough, because I guess my thinking is if we're trying to make this place more walkable, like,
You know how far that goes? 35th Street. Do you know how many?
yeah.
And
So if the sidewalks are bad, it's like any other property owner, they would have to fix them now. That might be an interesting way to approach the problem.
Let's go ahead and comment related to that.
Another thing to consider there is you're gonna have a lot of ADA ramps that would have to be engineered and designed. If you allow individual property owners to do that, it's the same conversation we have with paving, where we have to link ADA ramps, curb ramps to the sidewalk. So if I just tell a property owner that, your 100 feet of sidewalk needs replaced, go do it. And they go do that, and then if we follow what we've done with paving, where the borough has done the ADA ramps, what they just put in might not match what the ADA ramp has to go through. So then we're ripping out, redoing stuff that was just done. The HOP permit is not just as simple as just saying, go add stuff to an HOP. We've done 3 revisions so far on this one to an HOP that was fairly cut and dry at the beginning as to what we wanted to do, where we wanted to do it. Because that would be a monumental task as far as your code department, or property maintenance person. It's not just as simple as doing, just go do it. The other thing that I'll mention about the sidewalks is, say you have 4 houses on one block. Each house has 100 feet of sidewalk. Out of that 100 feet of sidewalk, they have 5 panels that are good. If I go to a property, like during the paving process, and I mark those 5 panels, or all of those 5 panels as bad, that's kind of doable for their contractor to go along there, because it may be that contractor may be just doing that house. So they can actually build the sidewalks to match what's there. When we're doing this for the whole 400 feet of that block, across all 4 houses, and there's 5 good panels, it actually costs more to have that contractor try to match everything to the existing panels, to get all the compaction right, and you're actually going to get a better job. I'm not going to say that you're going to save money, but you're going to get a much better job that's going to last far longer. And the contractor's not going to be there forever trying to match something that's existing to something new, that the slopes are probably going to be a little different because of all the ADA. So just other things to think about. I mean, there's a long swath. I mean, you're going 15th Street all the way to, they're almost the,
Yeah.
It's a lot, and it's all state. So I can't even imagine how much it would cost to do all the ADA ramps, all the HOP permits. The borough is going to be named on every one of those permits. So there's going to be interaction between us for all of those. That's why on state roads, it kind of does help to have it as one project in a very defined area. Another example of that is you have the 24th Street crosswalk that has the papers in it. There's another one at 29th. When I first first got here, I got a complaint about both of those, making the noise when you drive over them. Just trying to add that one crosswalk at 29 is not doable. We can't add it to the existing. So we've talked about adding that to 31st Street. There's a project in the beginning phases of doing some crosswalk work down there by I don't know the name of it, it's the core light here in Mission Barbecue. Just adding one crosswalk to this would be good to us. We kind of have to make another project for that area just to get that crosswalk done. It's already there, that just needs fixed. It's a lot, there's a lot to go through that.
All right, so the wild card is a little bit wild.
Let's do one.
Yeah, thank you. I
Thank you,
appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I guess a decision maker in me is like, what are our options? One is we just don't even do it at all. That could be an option. We just give up on this idea of a downtown altogether and just some cost fallacy. So we put $300,000 towards design for something that the community said they wanted to do like 10 years ago.
And the money we've already borrowed for the project.
And the money that we've already borrowed. So, you know, maybe we can fix other sidewalks somewhere else. Yeah, so there's got to be a balancing act here. And if we want to do this project, we need the downtown group of businesses to get some like leverage and help to get other folks who.
If you'd like to discuss that more, tomorrow I'm having a committee meeting. We're going to be going over just such things.
Okay, awesome.
Okay. Any other discussion?
No, I just gonna say, purposing the 1 million that we borrowed isn't probably necessarily as easy as what we think it could be. There could be stipulations with that borrowed money that would limit us and what we can do. So
Well, yeah, and also to add on to that, we would not use that for sidewalks because our policy is that we do not pay for sidewalks
Right.
anywhere in the borough. So just to, you said something about we use that for sidewalks, that would not be an option given our current policy. And if I could just add to that, the other issue to consider is that we have received a grant for $700,000 and it looks incredibly bad to return grant money and would jeopardize our opportunity to get funding from the granting agency in the future.
I have a question about the sidewalk repayment, but before that, I was just curious. With the stormwater fee, do we tax exempt properties from that? No, okay. My question was going to be, I asked that because if we do, is that something we could consider with churches? But the answer is no. Okay. Sidewalk repayment. So I was wondering, are we talking about particular length of time? It was vague. So 1 year, 2 years, are they making monthly
So,
amounts?
so that's a policy decision we need to make is, the idea is that we would, first we need to move forward and we need to bid out how much it's actually going to cost and figure out how much each property owner will owe us. And we need to figure out what kind of software or billing system we're going to use to be able to have them pay monthly payments. But then beyond that, the question is, how much are we going to carry over time? So is it a 12-month repayment, 18 months, 24 months? I had a thought that maybe there's a possibility as soon as we get bids and know what the dollar value is, there could be a repayment before the project started, so that it could be a longer payment period, which would then hopefully impact homeowners less. But I'm open to any thoughts on how long anyone thinks is the appropriate length of time for such repayment.
Maybe for the purposes of this discussion, if we can start somewhere with 2 years and just see where that conversation goes. But with regard to repayment, though, was it discussed or will it be discussed that either, in the event somebody sells their house
Right.
before repayment is made in full, like that obligation is still there for them to fulfill. It's not transferred to the next project.
Right. I think that that's fair. I mean, there is, if there was non-payment by someone, then, after multiple warnings, we would go ahead and put we would lien their property, right? So in the event of a sale, it would have to be taken care of before it settles or when it settles. You know what I mean?
And this is something that we would do by policy or would be worked out among administrative staff. It's not coming back to us as an ordinance. If we were to approve, say, a 2-year repayment plan, those details will be worked out
Yeah.
and won't come back to us for approval.
As I recall, the sidewalk ordinance has a provision for already for leaning for those sidewalks that we have to put in. So we have the ordinance in place to require the replacement of the lien process. You know, you're working out essentially a payment arrangement under a collection issue.
So the 120 days that's already in the ordinance is irrelevant in this case then?
We'd be working out a payment arrangement.
Okay.
The only question I have is, have we heard back as to whether we can extend the 700,000 grant so we can find out about the second grant yet?
No.
We haven't heard back.
No, I haven't had time.
Oh, okay, all right, I just didn't know.
That was just Thursday. but
Okay. all right. I know, it seems like a lot happened since then.
A lot has happened. That answer, I mean, we're gonna want that answer in writing, and it's gonna take them a little time to even be willing to put it in writing. So
What was the drop dead date? Like, I don't know, like, when was the absolute last day that we needed to know that information?
as to whether the grant could be extended,
Or we need to make that decision of,
the drop.
to drop that application.
I mean, there is no drop dead date for that. It's a question of if we're ready to move forward and we don't have this grant fund, can we move forward without them? And that, at that point, we would say we would forfeit the grant either perhaps after we would have gotten it or not gotten it. We might make the decision to do that prior to even knowing if we would get it. But we don't have a drop dead date yet.
One more comment, Emily, is it possible that we could table this till after you talk to the downtown group to see if they're still excited about doing this project, knowing that, you know, they're gonna pay for sidewalks?
I mean, I feel like these are two separate things.
But I heard some folks in that downtown group that, I guess, 3 or 4 months ago came and said that they didn't want to pay, they didn't know they had to pay for sidewalks. And they were kind of upset about it.
Right, but in that circumstance, they are property owners, community property owners, not business owners, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like the downtown
I see,
association,
but we're not really meeting with the property owners necessarily.
that is a separate thing that we are doing as part of the streetscape project, not the downtown Camp Hill Association.
Okay.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, no, I follow you.
Okay.
And just to come back to that, just as we mentioned, the sidewalk ordinance exists. There have been numerous calls related to complaints about the condition of sidewalks, and we have put requests for repairs of those particular blocks on hold because it's part of this larger project. So deciding that we don't move forward with the streetscape project does not mean that property owners are not going to be responsible for necessary sidewalk repairs. So I do just want to clarify that.
Right.
We do need to have sidewalk repairs where needed, regardless of whether we have streetscape or not.
Right,
And there won't be any grant money to help with the curbs.
right.
Right.
If we don't go through with the streetscape project.
Okay, so if there's no further discussion on that, I will turn this to Mercedes for Parks and Rec report. Did you have anything else, Emily?
No, I have had enough over here.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't.
Emily, kudos, great report.
Okay, Parks and Recreation. Camp registration and full memberships will be available starting March 1st. We are now accepting employment applications for summer camp counselors, assistant pool manager, pool lifeguards, and snack shack positions. Applications are available on our website and are due by March 1st or whenever the position is filled. Upcoming events, we have the Buddy Extravaganza. It's scheduled for April 8th, and registration is live online. The Kite Festival is scheduled for May 15th, and the Memorial Day Parade and festivities will be held on May 30th. And lastly, the Recreation Committee meets the fourth Tuesday of every month at 4 o'clock. That concludes my report.
Unrelated, I just had a resident reach out to me, and I don't know if this is for Audrey too, and whether it's been discussed or not, but I know there's an interest among parents to have Wi-Fi at the pool.
I got the email and we can definitely discuss it at the next meeting. Thank you. Planning and zoning, Bonnie.
All right, we had our planning and zoning meeting last week, January 21st. And the monthly report and the minutes of that meeting are in your packet. I just want to draw attention to the fact that there is a draft ordinance regarding wireless facilities in your packet. And just to remind the audience here what that is about, Act 50 was passed by the state requiring municipalities to allow communication companies like Verizon to come through and put the little 4G barrels on utility poles or separate poles. So a lot of municipalities have been scrambling to put together an ordinance that provides us some leeway for design, location, and fees. And toward that end, the borough of Camp Hill, with the assistance through the Capital Region Council of Governments, we joined in coordination with some other municipalities who are also part of the Council of Governments, and we combined to pay for services from the Cohen Law Group. The Cohen Law Group has particular speciality in the ordinance legislation regarding, excuse me, in the legislation regarding these wireless facilities, and are very, very specialized in drafting ordinances regarding them. So we did just get an ordinance from them. Our planning and zoning committee did review the ordinance. We noted some questions, and the Cohen Law Group responded. And since then, it has gone to our solicitor. The solicitor has updated or made any minor modifications, and that is what is in your packet for review tonight. Let's see. So we're hoping, as part of the motion tonight, that we can get approval to forward that on to the Planning Commission and the County Planning Commission, get feedback, and then we would set a public, we notified the public that it's out there for 30 days and then have a public hearing and possibly adopt it in May. So is that correct? Yeah. Okay. And then I think, did I see our next planning and zoning committee meeting is on February 18th. The next thing under my list is the climate action plan task force. Just as an FYI, we've been working with Messiah College students. They have produced a greenhouse inventory that is reflective of our borough, and that has been submitted to the state. Our next meeting, we are going to begin, well, not our next meeting, the next couple of steps we will be taking is evaluating that carbon footprint and evaluating results of the climate action plan survey that has gone out to the borough. And we're going to develop some focus groups that would be with residents and businesses that have expressed interest on the survey. So we can begin discussing possible reductions in the borough's greenhouse inventory. The survey will close on February 18th. So if you got your utility bills, there is a QR code on that that you can use your phone to access the survey. It's also out on the website. That's it.
But were you going to talk about the other two, Hoover and Frederickson, or?
Oh, I was gonna wait. Okay. Sorry. Is that okay with everybody if I wait for the engineering report on this issue? You want to do that then?
Yeah, where do we have the engineering report?
It's under planning and zoning under our new business.
Or do you want to hear about it now? We should probably hear about it now. You want to hear about it now? Okay, yeah, just, that's okay, just, that's fine. If there's any comments or questions, sure, go ahead.
We reviewed a plan for the Frederickson Library at a patio on the western side. The patio measures 50 feet long by 24 feet wide, and there are a couple of sidewalk connections. It doesn't meet the definition of a land development under the MPC, so it's not submitted as a subdivision and land development plan, but it is enough new impervious area to require stormwater management. We reviewed stormwater management calculations from the library's engineer, issued some comments. They got back to us and addressed the vast majority of those comments. And we're pretty comfortable with the plan at this point. The overall stormwater strategy is to take advantage of some pervious pavement that was installed on the western side of the library on Walnut Street back in about the 2013 timeframe. But in order to follow that strategy, there are two waivers requested. We don't have any technical objections to either of them, but I'll give you a brief summary of what they are. The ordinance requires that, or stipulates that a stormwater management plan approval is valid for a period of 1 year. So in order to use facilities that were built back in 2013, they were oversized at that time, and they have capacity to take this new runoff, but that's longer than a period of 1 year. So there's a waiver request for that section. The second one pertains to the proximity where you can store water to the surface. There's a provision in the ordinance requiring that any underground storage be 1 foot or more below the surface. Because this is a pervious pavement product, or pervious pavement system, that doesn't make sense really, because you store it in the subgrade for the pavement, which comes right up to the bottom of the asphalt. Asphalt's typically not a foot thick, it's more in the range of 6 or 8 inches. We think that provision probably didn't consider pervious pavement. It would make sense if we had pipes in the ground or something like that, but it doesn't really make sense for pervious pavement. But we would recommend changing that provision to exempt pervious pavement systems in the future, but that's the other modifications requested. Other than those two, there's a financial security that needs to be posted for the erosion sediment controls. If the project were to be abandoned and there was muddy runoff, those sediment controls would have to be put in by somebody. There needs to be a financial mechanism by which the borough can do that. The applicant's engineer submitted an estimate. We reviewed it. We concur with it. That's the amount of $2,476.43. Those are really the only 3 comments we have on this plan at this point. Everything else has been addressed.
Do you want to go over the, did we cover all of them in this one? Okay.
Those were the 3 comments we had on the Frederickson plan.
Oh, okay.
On the
Yeah.
Hoover O&M agreement, was that the other one we wanted to talk about?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll ask Sarah to speak to that one.
Thanks, Mike. So the Hoover School did an expansion, was very far along into the process when I started, so I can't speak to the whole design of it or how it was approved or how it was inspected. However, it's pretty much done, and at the end of the project, they are required to commit to maintaining the basin that was installed according to the guidelines for that best management practice, which is as a BMP. You'll enjoy learning that term many times. So we have to record an agreement that they commit to maintaining that basin, and in doing so, by them committing to doing that, we will not have to maintain it ourselves. If they fail to maintain it, we will be permitted to go in and maintain it at their expense. We will charge them for that. Included in that is the fact that there is a manhole in the middle of the basin. That's where it is. And they need to have an agreement to allow us to have access to that sanitary sewer manhole. So that is the secondary agreement that goes along with the O&M agreement.
Okay, if there are no questions about that, for Bonnie, we will go on to personnel policy and procedure. Michelle?
So on the agenda is to consider whether or not there's publicly advertised monthly of the PPD. committee. The PPP committee has not met to discuss the issue, and we do not have a recommendation. But because there was interest in having the discussion, it was put on the agenda.
Goes without saying, I'm in favor of advertising PPP meetings. I think there's been instances where if they had been open, the public would have had the opportunity to comment on such things. That we, might find, value in their input. So with that being said, I am in favor of advertising those meetings. But to know that in the, with the exception that unless it's something that can be, under the Sunshine Act, that would be enumerated in one of those 7 exceptions, that if it's something that falls under that category, there can certainly be a closed meeting. I would only ask though that if it would be a closed meeting of PPP, that council be notified of what's going on. Otherwise, council could have access to what would otherwise be an executive session of council and what So if we're not going to be part of the PPP closed meeting conversation, I would at least like to know what is being discussed, but otherwise I would, support those meetings being open and advertised.
My comment on this is, I think the PPP committee meeting should stay closed. It's an opportunity for Sarah to discuss any staffing issues. And I think that should be held in confidentiality. I also feel that, number one, every committee that we have only is a non-quorum group of council members. So my understanding is that because we are a non-quorum, we really don't even have to open up any committee meetings to the public. We do so because we want to be transparent. But we are talking about personnel issues, even policy, and policy sometimes on a committee meeting level, especially one that's closed, with regard to personnel issues, may have examples of employees that are pertinent to the policy discussion. In my experience in the 2 years I've been on council, is that anytime there has been a PPP meeting, that information, especially if policy discussions took place, there is a recommendation that comes to council so that the policy can be discussed in open public, and the policy has been posted in the package. I think it would be bad policy to have it open. Just saying.
I go ahead, Chef. I do have more comments.
Hey, look, anytime we can have an open meeting, I'm all for it. I guess if we're talking about someone specific, right, then it should be closed. Because that means the Sunshine Act. So I would rather lean towards more transparency than a gray area.
There are often specific instances that affect multiple employees. So I want to be careful that when you look at that provision in the Sunshine Act, it deals with issues that affect more than one employee too. So just be wary of that.
I understand the non-quorum aspect, but even so, if we're doing what the other committees are doing, and I understand that committees are not necessarily voting and taking actions, and they are solely for the purpose of making recommendations to council. But 2 things. There have been instances in which after the fact we've learned that certain people have been hired, or certain people not hired, but certain people have been interviewed, certain things have been discussed without the remainder of council being made aware, when had we known, one or more of us might have had input. So I think that could resolve that issue. But also, again, I understand they're only making recommendations, but they are talking about agency business. They are framing it, they are preparing it, they are discussing possibly policy, regulations, etc. So again, in the interest of transparency, which the majority of us, I think, ran upon, again, I'm in favor of that with the exception that if it is an enumerated reason for a closed meeting, including discussing personnel matters, you know, I'm in favor of advertising PPP and making them open to the public.
I just have a question because I'm new to all of this. With PPP and personnel and the Sunshine Act and making sure that we're transparent, is this something that is usually done in a public meeting, or are these types of discussions, like say in another municipality or whatever, would they have opening meetings? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, are we kind of going against the grain by having private meetings? And then when it is things that can be shared, it is shared.
So I would say that there's, especially as it relates to Sunshine Act and particularly with employment matters, because of the particular confidentialities that may apply, there is no bright line rule for Sunshine Act employment matters. It really is going to be a fact-based inquiry. So what I'm hearing is there's a desire to have those items that can be discussed publicly be discussed publicly. However, there needs to be a process established whereby those items that should likely not be discussed publicly be done elsewhere in a private meeting, a non-public meeting. Now, in terms of how that has worked since Sarah has been here, Sarah will, and even before that, but Sarah's here now, we'll talk about the process we have. Sarah will reach out to me. She'll say, I'm having this particular issue. What should we do? And then we'll say, well, that is likely one of the 7 items that we can have a executive session to discuss, and then we do so. So that we don't say exactly which provision in the Sunshine Act may apply. That's not the requirement. You have to just say what you're going to discuss. And we'll work to come up with the announcement for the meeting that will be presented to the public. And I think that works. And I think that you can have the standing public meeting with the understanding that the process will be such that items that may come through that committee that might have Sunshine Act issues will be discussed with Sarah. If she needs my input on a fact-based question, I'll discuss it with her, and then it can be scheduled for a non-public PPP meeting. That way we have them on we have them. If we want to discuss, luncheons on Fridays.
With the remainder, though, the council would have a clue, have some knowledge of what that closed meeting might be about.
That's certainly a policy decision you all can make on that. But again, if we're discussing Friday luncheons for the staff, we can do that. And if that's the kind of thing, I'm being a little flippant, my apology, but I think that if we can all come to an understanding as to what will be the process for determining when it isn't, I think it goes a long way to sort of satisfying everyone's concerns and moving forward with the work people for.
I have a question. So if we have the PPP meetings open, and then anything that would need to be private, is there a value to having that be a private PPP meeting or just having an exec session of council?
You can really go either way there. If you want the PPP to vet it first before an exec, and that could help suss out any potential Sunshine Act executive session topics. So that it could be working that way from, okay, PPP, we're venturing into rough waters. Let's maybe go to an exec with the full council on this item because it's a permissible Sunshine Act executive session topic.
I think I would feel more comfortable with the idea of making these meetings public if a solicitor was present, because it's very easy to start talking about policy and then get into terms and conditions and union stuff, and all of a sudden maybe somebody inadvertently discloses something that could become a liability for the borough. So I think I would feel more comfortable if a solicitor was present.
My concern with having public meetings is I feel like the more people that know information that shouldn't go public, the more chance there is of it going public. And like Mercedes said, that we want to be really careful that we don't cross that line.
How often does PPP meet? Does it meet monthly or not monthly?
No.
Only as needed.
Historically, PPP has met as needed for matters that were personnel related. With the respect to hiring, I personally think hiring, with the exception of the borough manager, where PPP vetted the candidates and then brought 3 candidates to all of council to interview for borough manager, but with director's positions, PPP has done the interviewing together with Sarah. Sarah's first done an initial round, and then PPP has interviewed candidates with the addition of, for instance, like Lester's position, Public Works, the chair of Public Works was joining PPP for the interview. I personally think having an interview with 8 people is a bit overwhelming. You know, with Sarah and potentially other staff, it could be 9, 10 people being interviewed. So, you know, PPP interviewed Sarah did pre-interviews and then PPP interviewed Colton, for example. And I don't think personally that is appropriate to have. I have no problem, obviously, council should know, but I don't think it's appropriate for all of council to be present on the interview process, only because I just don't think it's a really welcoming environment.
I don't disagree. I'm not really disagreeing with that aspect, just so that we, each of us being new members, are just aware that we are delegating what would otherwise be a conversation that we would have in executive session, but it would be a conversation being had by PPP instead. So for whatever reason, that was the practice before us, just so that we are aware that we are similarly making that same choice. You know, that those hiring related, like in other, you know, personnel matters would be discussed in PPP in a closed meeting, non-executive session as council as a whole, okay? But for other public related like matters, if we're discussing a PPP manual or some other policy upon which the public might have input, if there are appropriate things for the public to provide input, then we advertise this meeting. If they're not needed, then we cancel the meeting.
Sarah, I have a question. What if we have a case where we have a lot of volunteer or board openings, and we're discussing people who apply to those positions? I guess part of me feels like, you know, if that committee brings up recommendations around people and then we're here in the public and like, then maybe I have to personally disagree in front of everybody about a particular person and the appropriateness of that individual being on that committee. Like, how do we handle that?
Honestly, we generally don't have an overwhelming number of applicants for any of our positions, but I think that's a really good point. And one of the things that I would suggest is that we have an entire council, and we've kind of been busy since you guys all were sworn in, but that we as an entire council return to the council operating manual that I led the charge to develop when I was elected 2 years ago. And essentially it's adopted by resolution. It's not a law or anything. It's basically just us outlining how we want to work as a body, you know, beyond what's required by law, which we have to do. But, you know, in terms of how we respond to resident emails, how quickly we do it, how we keep minutes for our meetings and everything. So I think one of the things that we could do, should we open the policy meeting, would be have a discussion of this policy manual about how we operate as council. And perhaps in that we might decide, well, for when we have a lot of applicants for a particular position, PPP vets them, but they send out the applications to all of council and say, hey, if you have any quick feedback, send it our way. I mean, I think there are ways that we can deal with that.
Yeah, because even if we're desperate for a volunteer for a certain group, and let's say we had an opening, we had one person raise their hand for it, and like I still feel like I want to weigh in because I'd be like, I don't want that person in that job. I don't care. Like, find somebody else.
And by you don't want that person, you mean you did not believe that they're qualified for that position?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're making a simple process very complicated. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, any other comments? All right, so Personnel Committee, PPP is not bringing any recommendation there. If there's interest in making a motion, somebody can do that individually during the action items. Sherry, the finance report.
Yeah, this will be very easy. We'll be looking in our packet later on to approve, all the bill paying. Just wanted to point out that you can, in your packet, thanks to Jared, is a nice, summary of our account balances. We did have our first meeting, which is held the fourth Thursday of every month at 8 a.m. And Jared was kind enough to step us all through the budget and just talk through the different accounts and kind of the considerations. Also in your packet, and we will be making a motion later to transfer money from the general fund to the pool fund. This is a typical transfer that happens every year. And outside of that, we'll be approving bill payment.
Just to make Jared's time worthwhile being here, 2 questions. So of the many bills that we have, were any of those expenses unusual or any of those new and recurring expenses?
So the ones that I left comments on all the way on the right side are more of the outliers. If you don't mind, there's 15.8 that I can go through the device.
No.
And what was the second question?
Or any of those new and will be recurring?
So the Heffernan insurance that is new this year, we're required to get cyber insurance to be covered under a general liability. But now that's pretty large now. Cyber company is now separated that out. So that one is new and it will be recurring once a year. So you'll see that January year. Some of the police leases are in there regarding body cameras, vehicle cameras, and tasers. Actually, tasers, everything. But, anyway, that's a once a year payment. You'll see that. In January each year, there's a contribution to the fire company. Just 1/4 of our budgeted contribution for the year. Quarterly. There was a few repairs to one of the street sweeper ones. New repair that are one-off.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if we have any liaisons, so I'll just run this report, so I'll run through them quickly. Anything on the school board liaison?
Yeah, we gotta figure something up because I don't historically sounded like there really wasn't a lot of interaction. So that's an action item for me to try to figure out how best to engage them, like maybe once a quarter, something like that. But more to come.
Okay, thank you. Stormwater authority liaison, Bonnie.
The stormwater authority met this week. It was noted that the work on Schoolhouse Road will soon be done, which is right out here. The next project scheduled for on 21st Street between Walnut and Market will begin in June, which Jennifer noted. Other than the projects that were already scheduled for this year, the authority is working to hold off on any new projects until the televising of the stormwater system is completed. They will continue to work on smaller maintenance type of projects if they can allocate those projects through use of the maintenance and repair budget. So that's where they are right now.
Thank you. Any comments? Okay, library board liaison, Michelle.
I met with
The director.
yeah, and
Sorry.
the liaison that's already like there to meet with us. And so we met just the other day and we're going to discuss how we can move forward and how we can work together. But probably like with the school board, it'll be like a quarterly meeting.
Thank you, Michelle. And then Capital Region Council of Governments, Bonnie.
No report, but the next meeting is on February 21st at 7 o'clock.
Thank you. And that brings us to our second period of public comment. Thank you all for your endurance. And if you would like to share a public comment, please come up to the microphone, state your name and address, and if you could limit your public comments to 3 minutes, that would be ideal. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to new business associated with each of the committees that we've heard in discussion. The first committee is the Public Safety Committee. Mercedes. I'd like the council to consider a request to use the streets for the Barrel Bash Project trick or treat race on November 5th, 2022. So again, I'd like to make a motion to approve. So just to clarify for the public and also so that we all are aware, there are some concern that by putting it on here as approve request makes it seem like everything that's led up to this point is meaningless, which is not the case. So we say consider, but when we're making our motions, we're making a motion to approve what's on here, and if people want to vote no, they can, obviously. So there's been a motion, we need a second.
Second.
Thank you. Okay. If anyone wants to pause for discussion, but we've already had opportunities to add comments and discussion, but if you want to add anything, you can. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote on that. All those in favor of approving the request to use the streets for the Earl Bash trick or treat trot 5K on 11/5/22, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Public Works.
So I'm gonna make the motion, and then it may or may not pass, and if it fails, we'll move on to the next one. So I'm going to make the motion that we approve pervious asphalt paving for the Cedar Park Trail.
I'll second that so we can have discussion if necessary.
I guess I'm concerned about it from a budgetary perspective and when we would just have to pay out, because I think right now we've already mapped out the budget for 2022. So
I agree.
The paving is probably going to be the last step in the process. After all the equipment has done its work in the stream, the stream project has to be done by June of 2023 in order to keep us on track with the MS4 project. So I think it's pretty likely that the pavement portion would be paid out in the 23 calendar year.
So do we need to make a decision about that now then or not?
We do need to know which way to file the permit application. We need to know what the surface is going to be and if it's going to be pervious or impervious.
Jennifer, can you repeat which kind of asphalt? I'm tired.
I move that we consider the pervious asphalt paving that would have a net increased cost of $55,000. But I'm moving that be our first surface to consider.
Could we use, just so you know, but is it possible to use the liquid fuels fund for trails or is that solely for roads? Solely for roads, okay.
If there are no other questions,
Yeah.
I'm just offering it because I do recognize that there is a cost that we would have to take into consideration. But considering that it does have an equal life cycle comparable to regular asphalt, it would not risk our grant opportunity. It would have no stormwater BMPs associated with it. And considering the earlier comment from the public, it would be an environmentally friendly option.
I guess I could I would vote in favor of something like that if I could understand what the opportunity cost is against next year's budget, what we would be giving up by making that decision. I'm not sure that,
I'm not sure that's something that we would know right now. That is something that we would have to go back and figure out.
I think my comment about the impervious is that I feel that it's a better, that it's better for meeting the ADA requirements.
I think they both pervious and impervious are equally ADA accessible.
Oh, right. I mean, that part I knew. Well, I meant between the impervious and then the wood chips and
Right.
the other ones, because they will be more likely to last longer, to be ADA compliant without maintenance, or as much maintenance as the other.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah,
could I suggest that we map out like the costs, like beyond this initial cost, just so we can have like the full scope of the cost of those choices?
I'm talking about maintenance.
Yeah, like I think it'd be really helpful to like stretch that out over 20 years or whatever. Just with
I
some
mean, I think
assumptions.
that's something we would have to, if this motion was passed and in the budget consideration discussions, that is something that we could have conversations about.
Yeah, but we can't do that right now while the motion's on the table. I think that we need to make a decision so that, my understanding is we need to make a decision tonight so that you can move forward.
Yeah, that's true. We do need to get the permit application filed to keep the stream project moving, so we don't miss our MS4 deadline.
Question, Mike, so under this, the impervious asphalt paving, you specify it requires BMPs for the widened area. Is the path for a non-pervious asphalt or impervious asphalt, is the path wider than it would be for pervious?
No, it's not wider under any of the options, but all of the options are wider than it is now. So we would need to mitigate for any of that new footprint. Under the DEP regs, compacted stone, which is the current surface, is an impervious surface. So we can net that out, but we would have to mitigate for anywhere that it's enlarged.
Okay, all those in favor of the pervious surface for the Secret Park Trail, please say aye. Aye.
wait, for pervious, not impervious.
Pervious, which is the one that is a higher maintenance, yeah, and more expensive. All those opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so that motion does not carry.
So I move to consider, I move that we choose the standard impervious asphalt as our trail project option.
Second.
Okay, so this option,
Yeah, we can turn it off.
so this option affects our stormwater situation.
It does result in an increase in runoff, which would have to be mitigated through some BMPs, getting my acronyms confused. We have considered that in the grant application that we would use some infiltration trenches along the side of the trail. And there is money in the grant to do that. So this option would be very much in line with just as the grant was filed and awarded.
So the water could run off into the creek, so thanks to the path.
No, the water would run off of the trail into an infiltration trench that runs parallel to the trail. And only when that infiltration trench overflows in large storm events, then it would run into the creek. That trench would be sized so that there would be no net increase in the stormwater rate or volume.
Yeah, just because the current trail at its current width is impervious, so it would just be the widened part that is adding impervious surface area, and that widened part is all that would need to be mitigated for. So the trenches are, I imagine it's like what happened at my house, you have some gravel, right? Buried below ground so that it's supporting that extra impervious surface and collecting that water that
Right.
comes off.
That's very much true. The trench would be below ground. There'd be a geotextile liner to keep the soil from migrating into the stone, and the water would run off into the stone and infiltrate into the ground.
So that's the same BMP that would take place for the compacted stone as well?
Yes. Yes.
But I think it's important to know that the asphalt has a long life. Okay. Would not risk our grant opportunity. Would have some new VMPs requirements, but is a lower maintenance. So I think those
lowest cost.
and lowest cost. Whereas the other options would risk our grant funding. Potentially.
Potentially, we'd have to circle back with the DCNR and get verification on anything that we would change, except for this one, because this is not a change.
To add to that, they would be the most reliably ADA compliant, handicap accessible over the long term.
Yes.
Okay, let's go ahead and vote on the motion that Jennifer made and that was seconded to move ahead with the material of impervious pavement in the Seabird Park Trail project. All those in favor, please indicate that by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
So there, let's just do a roll call vote. Emily Smith,
Aye.
Jennifer Hoover,
Aye.
Lonnie Benz,
Nay.
I am an aye, Alyssa Packer. Mercedes,
Yes.
Michelle,
I'm not.
you're an aye, and
I'm a nay.
Sherry is a no. So the motion carries. We will move forward with the impervious pavement. Okay, community business relations, Emily,
Okay.
I hope you're rested.
I'm ready to go to sleep. Okay. So, there was a note in the first action item I have is to make a motion to approve the memorandum of understanding with the Downtown Camp Hill Association. I know we might make a change, but let me go ahead and make the motion first.
So,
Okay.
did you, I think,
I think I did. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, discussion.
I would like to just make a friendly amendment possibly and strike out the reference to Market Streetscape project and replace it with language that says improvements to the downtown improvement district streetscape design.
Okay. How do I do this in this?
There would have to be a first and second.
Yeah. I'll
Well,
second
this is
that.
a friendly amendment, that you don't really need to go through all that rigmarole, but
Okay,
That's fine, if you're fine with that, Emily, as the chair of the committee.
yeah, I'm fine with it.
Okay. Other discussion, so consider that amended to reflect the changes, Jennifer. Oh,
is everyone?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
do we need to vote on these?
No.
Or have Emily accepted?
She accepted. So
Okay.
I would say no to what she said.
Okay, so consider that amended to reflect the new wording, and we'll make sure that gets in the minutes. Other comments, or are we ready to vote on the MOU? Okay, all those in favor of approving the memorandum of understanding with the Downtown Camp Hill Association, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Emily.
Okay, next on my agenda,
Can I make a motion to appoint Emily? It seems a little awkward.
Yeah.
May I move to make the motion to appoint Emily Smith as council liaison to the Downtown Camp Hill Association?
Second. Okay, and I'm assuming we have no real discussion. If you want to say anything, hop in quickly. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and vote to approve Emily Smith as council liaison to the Downtown Camp Hill Association.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. That's just my position. I think she engages really well with the business owners, and I think she'll be an asset as a liaison.
thanks, Jerry.
Okay, all those in favor of appointing Emily to that position, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Emily.
Okay, next. So I'd like to make a motion to confirm the prior council's policy of paying for the curb replacement in the streetscape project using grant funds. Did I do that right?
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay,
Very torn about this one. I just think it's a hard decision because I feel like other people in the borough would love to have a grant to pay for their curbs.
And perhaps we can find grants for them as we go through. I mean, there's always an opportunity to look for more grants for different things.
So I would love to see that.
I would
I
too.
just feel like we should be very equitable.
My own, I just wondered if, I understand residents and we need answers, residents need answers. But I wonder if we're making this particular decision too soon. And would it be better to make the decision after bids come in? Because if we are assuming a certain cost now and bids come in higher, are we still obligated to pay?
I mean, I think the reason we need to make this decision now is because we need to send communications to all the property owners downtown so that we can discuss all of the options and what's going to happen. And we can't do that if we haven't made a policy decision on this.
But what happens if the bids come back even higher than what we're anticipating right now? What obligation would we still have to make that?
Could we make it contingent upon like a 10% increase? We could cover that.
I don't think we can.
Well, you know what I'm saying? Like have some contingency around that decision. So
I
it's not
guess
that way.
if bids come in higher, what will happen?
I think if bids come in higher, we need to reevaluate certain aspects of the project. For me personally, it wouldn't be the curbs because the curbs are one of the parts that are in the worst shape. One of the things that the previous council discussed and ultimately decided to keep in was, do we cut out a whole block, like not go down to night, stop at Roberto, stop at the next street. For me, I would see cost savings coming from I would like, my preference would be to cut out a block rather than to just not do curbs, because I think curbs are an integral part of the project. But there are options as the bids come in. If it's over budget, we always have the ability to scale back. I don't think we would want to say we were doing curbs and then go back, even if we had the legal ability to do so, which you can comment on in a minute. I don't think we'd want to go back. That would really create ill will between property owners and the borough if we were to go back on our policy decision.
Yeah, and this has been dragging on for a while for them, not for us necessarily, but for them. And I think we should provide an answer.
Okay, all those in favor, there's been a motion made and seconded. All those in favor of confirming the decision of the prior council to pay for curbs as part of the curb replacement and streetscape project using the existing grant funds, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Emily.
Next. So in order to make this motion, we didn't have a full discussion on what we actually think the repayment plan should be. So I'm going to throw out a number and then as part of my motion, and then we can discuss and amend if necessary. I'm going to make a motion to make a repayment plan for sidewalks to be replaced by the borough and reimbursed by property owners with a timeline of 2 years.
And why? Can you give us a little rationalization around your 2 years?
I think there's three choices. I think it's 12 months, 18 months, or 24 months. I don't think we can go further than that and be responsible with our budget. But I also would like to make the monthly payments for the property owners to be as low as possible. So pushing it out further would do that.
When's the start date for the 24 months? Would that be when it's done? Because when are we supposed to be starting this project?
That's actually a good question. You had originally suggested maybe to have them start paying before the project. As soon as the bids come in and they would know how much they have to pay out of pocket, I would be comfortable with doing a longer term, like starting before the project.
Right. I think that that's the best option. The sooner we get started, but in conversations with Sarah, there's a lot of logistical things that we need to figure out before we can even start that, because we have to figure out how we're going to set up the payment system.
So,
And
so if we were to agree to the 24 months and all those logistics that needs to be discussed, those things would come back to us just to be briefed upon, not for adoption or consideration, but to be at least briefed upon about what those logistics and details are.
right. I think so.
You're not gonna, you can't decide every single detail tonight. You're deciding on a general direction. Are we having a payment plan or not? If we're having a payment plan, is it gonna be 24 months? So you have a motion, you probably want a second if you want to keep going with this topic.
Second,
Okay, so we won't set the clock right now. We'll just say that what the payment plan will be, and we would come back and say when to set the clock. I guess in thinking about the setting the clock part of it, I guess, just to think ahead a little bit. When we tell people we're paving a street, how long do they have to get their sidewalk? Like they get like a year notice, right?
Way less
30
time,
days, holy.
way less time.
Okay, I guess, Jennifer just read those tonight if you have.
It was like they have till May or
yeah, I
June.
did.
It was like May for sidewalks and June for curbs.
But were they notified already, those residents?
They'll be notified shortly.
Right, so they weren't even notified yet.
But I'm just
They
saying, like,
have it done.
According to our
Right.
ordinance, according to our way we usually do these things, when we pave the street, right? People have to fix their sidewalks within 30 days.
I think it's 60 because we're giving them in this particular upcoming season, it was right between
Yeah.
May and July or something with all work to be completed by September 1st.
30 days in the ordinance to go after property change. But by the time we notify you you're deficient, you have 30 days.
To fix it.
Right. If you're deficient, then you.
Yeah, I get that part. I'm surprised how short notice.
I personally would like to see it shorter, I think, like 12 months, just for the purposes of budgeting, with the ability for people to request a special exception to extend it for 2 years as necessary, but I like the idea of a payment plan.
I also would like to see a shorter payment plan. I personally like the 2 years because I feel like we should be as kind as possible and give them as much latitude as possible.
Okay, so there's a motion and it's been seconded for a 2-year payment plan. All those in favor of 2 years, please say aye.
Aye.
I'm gonna do roll call. Emily Smith,
Aye.
Jennifer Hoover.
Yeah.
Jerry Bowman. Oh, I'm sorry. Really getting late. Really getting confused. Bonnie Benz.
I know I should give an answer, but I have a question. I can't answer the question.
Sorry.
I guess yes.
I would vote no. Mercedes.
No. No.
Yes.
Okay, that motion does not carry if my math is right. So is there another motion?
I'd like to make a motion for the repayment plan of the sidewalks that are part of the Market Street Streetscape project to be 18 months.
Second.
I'll second.
You should have just jumped right to the one we're all gonna vote yes.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. All those in favor of an 18-month repayment plan, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
No,
No, I think the motion carries though. Right, who was no? It was me, Mercedes. The motion carries. So we are going to communicate that we will approve an 18-month repayment plan. And I think Emily, you can rest now. Parks and Rec. Oh, sorry. All right, Parks and Recreation. I forgot about this in my report. So the Lion Foundation had approached Parks and Rec Committee about donating a pool membership with a resident price for their silent auction, and the borough has done this for several years in the past. So I'd like us to consider, I'd like to make a motion to donate a pool membership to the Lion Foundation for the silent auction.
What's the value of that? Like, because I know, I want to understand how much, I can't remember how much. Is it a family membership? Is it a single membership?
No, I just like to know, that we're providing that donation, the Lion Foundation receives those, funds, and they're all reinvested, most, vast majority of that is all reinvested back into our school for the benefit of our students.
And historically, how much money did the Lion Foundation make over our donation? Do they let us know, like, let's say it's worth 184, do they usually make 184 off of it? Do they make $200 off of it?
After we make a donation, it's up to them what they do with it.
But I will say, as somebody who has gone to those and participated, and I don't think some of the things do go other than.
Yeah, they do. I was just curious. Thanks.
Okay, all those in favor, there's been a motion and a second, all those in favor of approving the request for the donation of pool membership to the Lion Foundation for silent auction, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Planning and zoning, Bonnie.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to consider operations and maintenance agreement for stormwater best management practices and sanitary sewer easement with Camp Hill School District, where they're based in at Cooper School.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor of the operations and maintenance agreement for the stormwater best management practices and sanitary sewer easement with Camp Hill School District at the Hoover Basin, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to authorize the issuance of a zoning permit and approve an operations and maintenance agreement for the Frederickson Library patio project, including approval of the requested waivers from the stormwater ordinance and posting of financial security as indicated in the engineer's comment letter dated February 3rd, 2022.
Second. Okay, all those in favor of the, I'm not going to read the whole thing. The motion to approve the issuance of the zoning permit and the O&E agreement for the Frederickson Library patio project, including the requested waivers, et cetera, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries.
And I would like to make a motion to forward the draft amendment and design manual to the Borough and County Planning Commissions to update the zoning ordinance to comply with Act 50 regarding small cell facilities.
Second. Okay, thank you. There's been a motion and a second. All those in favor of forwarding the draft amendment and design manual to the Borough and County Planning Commissions to update the zoning ordinance that complies with Act 50, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Aye for me. Okay, that brings us to PPP. And there's no recommendation from the committee, so if anyone would like to make a motion here, they can.
I move that we publicly advertise monthly meetings of the PPP committee.
Second.
But are they actually monthly? I thought they weren't.
We could advertise, I mean, I think what this would do, it would advertise monthly meetings and the vast majority of them would be canceled. But it's still probably cheaper, and Sarah can correct me if I'm wrong here, it's still probably cheaper than advertising one-off meetings on the months when they would be open. Okay, I have a question. Yeah. You were in a PPP committee for a couple years, right? How often, all of these ad hoc meetings, how often was it actually about policy versus personnel? The vast majority were about personnel matters, I will say. The big policy one was when we met to kind of discuss an operating manual for the work we do as council, I would say. That was done. And that was really the main occasion. And that probably could have been done in public. There wouldn't have been anything sensitive about that, but it also, I will say, it was included in the manual and it was discussed repeatedly there was no action taken at that meeting. It came in front of council on multiple occasions before it was adopted, with the public having an opportunity to see it and give feedback. And they did. Yep.
I just think, though PPP may have held a majority of meetings specific to personnel, I do still see that there's an opportunity for the public to have input at the committee level before it gets to council. So again, for reasons of transparency and to allow for public input and opportunity, and to, re-envision the use of the committee if it's useful.
Okay, I know we had an opportunity for comments about this previously, so we'll go ahead and vote. I'm just gonna go right to roll call vote because I think we're gonna need that anyway. So I'll start at this end, so I'm not putting Emily on the spot every time. Sherry Bowman,
I vote in favor of advertising these.
Michelle Ford.
No.
Mercedes. No. Me, I'll vote yes.
No.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Emily.
No.
Okay, that motion does not carry, correct? Correct. Thank you.
I can't count.
Just had to get late. All right, next item, finance. Terry.
All right, terrific. I am making a motion to approve the payment of checks in the amount of, this is always the challenging part, $293,918.76.
There's a second.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor of payment of checks in the amount of $293,918.76, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, all those opposed? Approved. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, I make a, excellent. Thank you guys for supporting me on the read out on the number. I make a motion to approve the transfer totaling, this one's a lot easier, $47,500 from the general fund to the pool fund.
Second. Okay, there's a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the transfer of $47,500 from the general fund to the pool fund, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, and that concludes our meeting and brings us to the final period of public comments. If you would like to comment, you know what to do.
Again, like video. Our previous comments, the comments from Amy and I, both in writing and by me orally, were specific to our property. I think the more general comments in order. It seems to me that the council before you and this council following up is looking at this project as another street project. It's not. It never has been. It's to beautify the downtown business. It's the streetscape. You go pave some section of 23rd Street or 25th Street somewhere. It doesn't have a name. It's not funded with grant money, and it's not talked about extensively. It's just done. And as part and parcel of that, you go to the residents of that street, you know, fix the sidewalks, if they're getting a new street up. But it doesn't benefit the whole borough. It doesn't benefit the borough. If the downtown shopping district is improved and making it walkable, hopefully businesses will flourish, there'll be more traffic in downtown, and everybody will benefit. So bringing in property owners in the manner in which you did, I don't know why that happened. Not only was sort of short-sighted, but I think it was also just sort of lost sight of the fact of what this project was about. It's not just improving Market Street, paving Market Street. That's not what's happening. Market Street is not anything. What's happening is the surrounding neighborhood of Market Street downtown is being improved for the borough's benefit. So coming to property owners, no matter how long you give them to pay for it, no matter if you use grant money to pay for the curbs, you're still bringing property owners into a public project. It's different than if you just go pay the street as a part of your maintenance. So I think as you go revisit this, it's going to continue to be talked about. It's already short of funds. I think you need to fix those things.
Yeah, hello, my name is Phil Wolf, 3013 Lincoln Street, Campbell. You're newer members here, I'm not sure if you're aware, there's a club in Campbell, it's called Campbell Environmental Club. We meet quarterly and have discussions at our meetings. And last Saturday, we had a meeting and the subject of recycling came up. And I understand bids are going out soon about trash collection. I believe in June or July. So we just wanted to make everyone aware that recycling is important. And the list of what is accepted has been decreasing every year. I mean, every time a bid comes up, you can recycle less and less. So we just wanted that to be an important part of the discussion, recycling, maybe more items, expand the list of items that are being able to be recycled. So that was our concern. So thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and I too have been concerned about the decreasing list of acceptable items, and I think also just the fact that people don't know that the list has been decreasing. I know I see a lot of recycling being dumped that includes things that are no longer accepted. So yeah, we will definitely consider that.
Sure, because we recycle more than we trash, and that's.
We will definitely keep recycling in mind. Thank you. Other public comments? Okay, then it is time for closing remarks by council. Emily.
Thank you all for sticking with us. And secondarily, anyone who's interested in any community business and government relations, we're having a meeting tomorrow at 4 p.m. So I welcome your presence as we make some decisions.
To those who may be with us online. In addition, thank you, but I just want to say shout out to the staff in Berlin and to our police chief who has sat and joined us for the last 2 hours. So I think we've made some improvements to the way we've restructured our agenda, but obviously it's allowing and providing for good conversation and dialogue, but it is kind of maybe extending the time, but as I talk, I just want to say, I appreciate the conversation about the PPP committee. I am obviously very disappointed in the vote, but if we are going to go forward with PPPs being closed meetings again, I just would urge that council members be notified in advance of what those conversations are.
I would just like to say, I think we still beat the school board meeting and are getting out earlier than we did on Monday night.
Oh, I keep thinking you guys are gonna.
We're beating.
I know, right?
I just wanted to thank everybody for sticking around, and I want to give a special shout out to the mayor and the chief. They do a great job looking for like outside funding to pay for trainings and just different things that their departments need. So thanks for that.
No comment.
Excellent meeting. I did want to make a note on a yay. I noticed that there's some cleanup happening along 32nd Street, right above where the Mission Barbecue and those businesses are. And I'm just curious, like, what prompted it? And can we continue to remove the debris on those sidewalks that are underneath there so that people, 32nd Street becomes more walkable? And there's actually sidewalk that goes the whole way up to Lincoln and keeps going. It's just under grass. So if we can start to continue to chip away at that and make that sidewalk something that people could use, that would be awesome. So hooray on the improvements so far. Thank you.
It's been,
And,
and that was, that was longer, right?
all right, is there a move to adjourn? Move to adjourn.
Sigh of relief.
Oh my God. Jeez.